The War in Heaven stands as the most devastating conflict the galaxy has ever witnessed, a cataclysmic struggle that reshaped reality itself and left scars in the fabric of existence that persist to the present millennium. It was during this apocalyptic conflict that the Old Ones, facing extinction at the hands of the Necron tier and their Khatan masters, created what would become one of their most formidable weapons, the Krorks. The necessity for the Krorks arose approximately 60 million years ago, when the bitter and envious Necron tier, a species plagued by short, painful lives due to the radiation of their homeworld star, encountered the virtually immortal Old Ones. This meeting sparked a war born of jealousy that would eventually threaten the very existence of the Old Ones, especially after the Necron tier formed their unholy alliance with the Khatan, the ancient star gods who fed on living energy. The Old Ones, masters of genetic manipulation and the creators of countless species throughout the galaxy, found themselves pushed to increasingly desperate measures. They had already created several warrior races, including the Eldari, but as the war intensified, they required something more brutish, more numerous, and more singularly focused on warfare. Thus began the grand experiment that would produce the Krorks. Archaeological evidence recovered from Trajan's collection on Solemnis reveals that the Old Ones applied their most advanced biotechnology to the Krork genome. Unlike their approach with the elegant Eldari, whom they crafted as their potential successors with complex minds and sophisticated souls, the Krorks were designed with singular purpose, to fight and to win through overwhelming force and numbers. Xenoarchaeological expeditions to dead worlds near the galactic core have uncovered fragments of what appear to be Old One biological engineering chambers. Analysis of these sites by both Adeptus Mechanicus genetors and Eldari bonesingers confirms a pattern of deliberate genetic manipulation on an unprecedented scale. The Old Ones began with a baseline organism, likely a primitive fungoid lifeform with exceptional reproductive capabilities, and systematically enhanced it with complex genetic structures that would allow for rapid adaptation, extreme physical resilience, and innate combat instincts. The most striking aspect of Krork design was their inherent scalability. Magos biologist Atren Vantius, who studied recovered Krork genetic material before his execution for tech heresy, theorized that the Old Ones created the Krorks with built-in evolutionary triggers. These triggers would activate in response to the scale and intensity of conflict they faced, allowing individual Krorks to grow larger, stronger, and more intelligent as they encountered increasingly powerful enemies. This explains the massive disparity between the primitive orcs of the current millennium and the 12-meter-tall Krork specimen recovered from Trajan's collection. Perhaps the most ingenious aspect of Krork creation was the implementation of a Gestalt psychic field, what would later become known as the Wa energy. The Old Ones, themselves psychic beings of immense power, understood that the Imperium could be harnessed as both weapon and tool. Rather than creating individually powerful psykers like the Eldari, they distributed psychic potential throughout the entire Krork species, creating a network effect that grew stronger as more Krorks gathered together. This psychic field served multiple purposes in the Krork design. First, it allowed for a form of collective intelligence, enabling even the most primitive Krork warriors to instinctively understand complex weapons and machinery when in sufficient numbers. Second, it created a self-reinforcing belief system that literally bent reality. Krork technology functioned because the collective Krork psyche believed it should function. Third, it generated a form of psychic interference that disrupted the Necron's control protocols and the Khatan's ability to manipulate physical laws within its radius. Inquisitor Bronislaw Chevak, who spent decades studying xenotech and briefly had access to Trajan's galleries, documented inscriptions suggesting that the Old Ones deliberately engineered the Krork's reproductive system as well. Unlike conventional biological reproduction, Krorks released spores throughout their lives, especially upon death, ensuring that battlefields would continuously spawn new generations of warriors without requiring infrastructure or supply lines. This made Krork forces nearly impossible to eradicate once established on a planet, a feature particularly useful against the methodical Necron legions. The earliest Krork civilization, as evidenced by artifacts recovered from various sites throughout the galaxy, was surprisingly sophisticated. Fragments of Krork armor found in the deepest strata of battlefields on the fringes of the Ghoul stars suggest technological capabilities far beyond those of modern Orks. These artifacts demonstrate an understanding of materials science and energy manipulation that rivals even current Adeptus Mechanicus achievements. The armor plating recovered from Solemnus by Fabius Bile during his brief alliance with Trazyn contained power circuits and neural interfaces of remarkable complexity, designed to enhance the already formidable Krork physiology. The Old Ones also implemented a rigid caste system within Krork society, with specialized variants engineered for specific military functions, while modern Orks develop into Boyz through a combination of genetic memory and environmental factors. Ancient Krorks appear to have been born into their specialized roles, with physiological adaptations specific to their function. Krork equivalent of Boyz possessed additional brain lobes dedicated to technological understanding, while their version of Boyz had extra limbs and enhanced visual organs for surgical precision. The psychic engineering of the Krorks extended to their very souls. Unlike the Eldari, whose souls were crafted to be bright and distinct, allowing for individual reincarnation and preservation in infinity circuits, Krork souls were designed to be fragmentary and collective. When a Krork died, its psychic essence did not fully dissipate into the warp, but partially reintegrated into the gestalt field of its species. This created a form of racial memory and experience that transcended individual death. Knowledge and skills were preserved within the species even as individuals fell. This aspect of Krork design became particularly important as the war in heaven intensified. The Necrons, having sacrificed their souls to the Khatan in exchange for immortal metal bodies, could be rebuilt after destruction. The Old Ones needed a counter to this endless resurrection, and found it in the Krork's ability to not only replace their numbers rapidly, but to preserve and build upon their collective experience with each generation. The earliest known Krork settlements, based on excavations near the Halo stars, reveal surprisingly sophisticated infrastructure. Unlike the ramshackle appearances of modern Ork encampments, ancient Krork structures featured precise geometric patterns and durable construction techniques. Their earliest cities appeared to be designed primarily as military installations, with defensive positions, weapons testing grounds, and massive factories for producing war materiel. Living quarters were minimal and utilitarian, emphasizing the species' singular focus on warfare. Examination of preserved Krork technology from this era reveals a fascinating blend of biological and mechanical engineering. Their weapons and vehicles incorporated living components that grew and adapted over time, becoming more specialized for their users. This biomechanical technology was self-repairing and partially sentient, responding to the psychic commands of its users without requiring complex control systems. The most remarkable archaeological discovery related to ancient Krorks came from the dead world of Thanator, where an explorator fleet discovered the remains of what appeared to be a Krork command center dating back to the war in heaven. Within this structure, they found a primitive but functional psychic amplifier, designed to focus and direct the Wa energy of thousands of Krorks into a coherent force. This discovery suggests that early Krork warlords had a far more sophisticated understanding of their psychic potential than their modern descendants. As the war in heaven progressed, the Krorks proved their worth as living weapons. Their endless numbers and ability to adapt to any battlefield condition made them ideal shock troops against the Necron legions. Their psychic field disrupted the Necrons' phase technology and command protocols, while their brutal, straightforward tactics overwhelmed the more methodical Necron warriors. Against the Khatan, the Krorks served primarily as a distraction, occupying the star god's attention, while the more psychically potent Eldari deployed the reality-warping weapons that could actually harm these near-divine entities. The Krorks' effectiveness can be measured by the extensive countermeasures the Necrons developed specifically to combat them. Specialized anti-Krork weapons have been discovered in Necron tombs, designed to not only destroy Krork bodies, but to sterilize their spores and disrupt their psychic field. These weapons suggest that the Necrons considered the Krorks a serious enough threat to dedicate significant resources to countering them. The relationship between Krorks and the other creations of the Old Ones appears to have been strictly hierarchical. Evidence suggests that while the Eldari were treated almost as equals by their creators, the Krorks were viewed as tools, albeit highly valued ones. The Old Ones implemented psychobiological constraints that prevented Krorks from turning against them or their other creations, including hardwired respect for psychic power and an inability to perceive certain frequencies of energy used in Old One technology. As the war in heaven reached its climax, the Krorks had spread throughout the galaxy, establishing footholds on countless worlds. They had evolved from the Old One's initial design, growing larger, stronger, and more cunning with each generation of conflict. The most ancient and battle-hardened Krork warlords stood as tall as Imperial knights, clad in armor that would make a tech marine envious, wielding weapons that could level cities. The transition from the war in heaven to the eventual degradation of the Krork species represents one of the most fascinating examples of biological devolution in the galaxy's history. The physical specimens recovered from Trazyn, the Infinite's collection on Solemnus, have provided the Imperium with its only concrete evidence of what these ancient warriors truly looked like, beyond fragmentary archaeological findings and often dismissed Eldari tapestries. The most immediately striking difference between ancient Krorks and modern Orks is their sheer size. While the largest modern Ork warbosses might reach 3 to 4 meters in height after decades of successful warfare, the average Krork warrior stood at least 5 meters tall. Elite specimens routinely grew to 8 meters, with the legendary warlords of their kind reaching 12 meters or more. The preserved specimen in Trazyn's collection measured approximately 12 meters in full battle armor, suggesting it was a military leader of significant importance. This gigantism wasn't merely a matter of increased height. Krork musculature density was approximately 35% greater than that of modern Orks, with enhanced myofibril structures that allowed for explosive strength without sacrificing stamina. Magos biologist Hextus Varn, who briefly examined tissue samples before his mysterious disappearance, noted that Krork muscle fibers contained specialized mitochondrial structures capable of sustaining anaerobic activity for hours without building up significant lactic acid, a biological feature that would allow them to fight at peak capacity for extended periods without fatigue. The skeletal structure of Krorks also differed substantially from their modern descendants. While modern Orks possess remarkably dense bones with a semi-metallic composition, Krork skeletons incorporated crystalline lattice structures that distributed force throughout the entire skeletal system. This allowed them to survive impacts that would shatter even ceramite armor. Examination of skull fragments from battlefield sites near the Ghoul Stars revealed cranial capacity approximately 60% larger than modern Ork specimens, with developed frontal and temporal lobes suggesting significantly higher cognitive function. Perhaps most telling was the neurological complexity evident in preserved Krork brain tissue. Unlike the relatively simple neural pathways of modern Orks, Krork brains featured specialized structures dedicated to tactical analysis, technological comprehension, and complex language processing. The language centers in particular showed evidence of being designed to comprehend multiple communication systems simultaneously, suggesting Krorks could understand and speak not only their own language, but potentially those of the Old Ones and other created races. The integumentary system of Krorks displayed equally sophisticated adaptations. Their skin contained layers of symbiotic fungal tissue that formed a semi-rigid subdermal armor capable of stopping projectiles and rapidly sealing wounds. This fungal layer wasn't merely protective, it served as a secondary circulatory system, distributing nutrients, oxygen, and specialized biochemical compounds throughout the body. When damaged, this layer would accelerate localized cellular growth, allowing Krorks to recover from injuries at rates that would make even Astartes' regeneration seem glacial by comparison. The symbiotic relationship between Krork and fungus extended far beyond mere wound healing. The fungal organisms integrated throughout their bodies formed a complex biological network that regulated everything from hormone production to neural transmission. This symbiosis was so complete that it becomes difficult to determine where Krork biology ended and fungal biology began. They were, for all practical purposes, a single organism with two distinct but interdependent components. This fungal network served as the biological foundation for the Krorks' most remarkable ability, their reproduction system. Unlike modern Orks, who release spores unconsciously and especially upon death, Krorks possessed specialized reproductive organs that could deliberately release genetically tailored spores to produce specific types of offspring. Examination of preserved specimens suggests they could control not only the timing of spore release, but the genetic characteristics of the resulting offspring, allowing them to rapidly produce specialized warrior types in response to specific threats. The reproductive efficiency of Krorks far exceeded that of modern Orks. While an Ork-infested world might take years to build up a significant population from initial spore contamination, historical records from the War in Heaven suggest that Krork forces could establish a self-sustaining population within weeks of landing on a planet. This accelerated reproduction relied on specialized cedar variants whose sole purpose was to spread and nurture the fungal networks that would eventually grow into new Krorks. The most profound biological difference between Krorks and modern Orks lies in their genetic memory systems. Modern Orks possess a rudimentary form of genetic memory that provides basic instinctual knowledge, enough to recognize Shuta from Choppa, to understand tribal hierarchy, and to perform specialized functions as Boyz. The Krork genetic memory system, by contrast, contained comprehensive technical knowledge, military tactics, and cultural information passed down directly from the Old Ones. Fabius Bile, who briefly studied Krork genetic material obtained during his alliance with Trazyn, described their genetic memory as a library written in nucleotides, with each chromosome a volume of ancient knowledge. This memory system wasn't static, but adaptive, incorporating new information through a mechanism similar to Lamarckian inheritance. Experiences and knowledge gained during a Krork's lifetime could be encoded into its spores, ensuring that subsequent generations benefited from the experiences of their predecessors. This genetic memory extended to technological understanding far beyond anything modern Orks possess. While an Ork mechboy might instinctively know how to cobble together a functional, if crude, weapon, Krork engineers inherited complete technical schematics for advanced weapon systems, power generation, and even void-capable vessels. The technological artifacts recovered from ancient Krork battle sites display precision engineering and sophisticated energy manipulation that rivals Imperial technology at its height. The neural pathways dedicated to accessing this genetic memory were substantially more developed in Krorks than in modern Orks. Whereas Ork Boyz must grow into their knowledge through a combination of instinct and experience, Krorks were born with immediate access to their inherited knowledge. This allowed even newly spawned Krorks to function as effective warriors, engineers, or medics, without requiring the lengthy development period seen in modern Ork society. The psycho-biological interface that enabled the Krork field also shows significant differences from its modern counterpart. While the Ork energy is largely unconscious and undirected, except by the most powerful warbosses, Krork specimens show specialized brain structures dedicated to consciously manipulating this field. These structures, located in what would be the pineal region in human brains, allowed Krorks to deliberately channel psychic energy to enhance their weapons, strengthen their armor, or even distort local reality in limited but tactically significant ways. This conscious control over their psychic field manifested most notably in Krork technology. Unlike the often unreliable, works because we believe it works, nature of Ork technology, Krork devices incorporated deliberate psycho-conductive materials that channeled and amplified the energy. Their weapons didn't function merely because of collective belief, but were specifically engineered to harness and direct psychic energy as a power source and enhancement. The degradation from Krork to modern Ork occurred gradually over millions of years, following the conclusion of the War in Heaven. Without the guiding hand of the Old Ones to maintain their genetic stability, and without the extreme evolutionary pressure of fighting the Necrons and Khatan, the Krork species began a slow process of simplification. Each generation born from spores became slightly less complex, slightly less intelligent, and slightly smaller than the one before. This degradation wasn't uniform across the galaxy. In regions where conflict remained intense, such as around the edges of expanding Necron tomb worlds, or in areas contested by the growing Eldari Empire, Krork populations maintained more of their original characteristics for longer periods. In regions of relative peace, the degradation occurred more rapidly, with Krork populations devolving into what xenobiologists classify as proto-orcs within a few million years. By approximately 30 million years ago, true Krorks had largely disappeared from the galaxy, replaced by various transitional forms that retained some advanced characteristics but had lost others. These transitional species still possessed greater size, intelligence, and technological capability than modern orcs, but lacked the full genetic memory and biological sophistication of their ancestors. The most recent example of these transitional forms was encountered during the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium. The Beast and its prime orcs displayed characteristics significantly closer to ancient Krorks than to modern orcs: greater size, more sophisticated technology, and higher intelligence, including the ability to speak Gothic fluently. Magos biologist Valentin Drusus, who studied the remains of one of the Beast's lieutenants, suggested that the extreme pressure of fighting the nascent Imperium had triggered dormant genetic sequences, temporarily reversing some aspects of the species' degradation. The physiological differences between Krorks and modern orcs extend to their sensory systems as well. Krork optical structures contained additional color receptors sensitive to frequencies in both the infrared and ultraviolet ranges, giving them superior night vision and the ability to detect energy emissions invisible to most species. Their auditory systems could process sound across a wider frequency range and with greater precision, allowing them to filter battlefield noise and focus on tactically relevant information. The olfactory capabilities of Krorks were similarly enhanced, with specialized chemoreceptors that could detect not only conventional odors, but also subtle changes in atmospheric composition that might indicate enemy movements or technological activity. This sensory suite made Krorks extraordinarily difficult to ambush or deceive through conventional means, as they could detect approaching enemies through multiple sensory channels simultaneously. The circulatory system of Krorks featured redundant hearts and a blood composition rich in oxygen-binding compounds more efficient than hemoglobin. This allowed them to function in environments with thin atmospheres or high concentrations of toxic gases that would incapacitate other species. Their respiratory system included specialized filtering structures that could extract oxygen from water or even certain types of rock when necessary, making them adaptable to almost any planetary environment. The digestive system of Krorks displayed equally impressive adaptability. While modern orcs can consume almost anything organic for sustenance, Krorks could process materials as diverse as metal ores, radioactive compounds, and even certain types of energy fields. This digestive flexibility allowed Krork forces to sustain themselves on virtually any world without requiring supply lines or agricultural infrastructure, making them ideal for the extended campaigning required during the War in Heaven. The technological capabilities of the ancient Krorks stand as one of the most underappreciated marvels of the War in Heaven period. While modern Imperial scholars focus primarily on the technological wonders of the Necrons or the psychic mastery of the Eldari, the Krorks possessed engineering prowess that rivaled both in many respects, despite being specifically designed as a warrior species rather than as natural innovators. The most visible manifestation of Krork technological achievement was their battle armor. Unlike the crude scrap metal plates favored by modern orcs, Krork armor consisted of interlocking ceramite analog plates reinforced with psychoconductive fibers that responded directly to the wearer's nervous system. The 12-meter specimen in Trajan's collection war armor that Archmagos Belisarius call himself noted contained metallurgical compositions unknown to the Imperium, with stress distribution properties exceeding even the finest Martian crafted Terminator plate. This armor wasn't merely protective, it functioned as a true power enhancement system. Microscopic examination of recovered fragments reveals a network of crystalline channels running throughout the armor plates, designed to capture and amplify the wearer's latent psychic energy. These channels connected to motion amplifier systems at major joint positions, allowing the armor to enhance the already formidable Krork strength by an estimated factor of 3 to 5 times. The most advanced specimens incorporated inertial dampening systems that allowed the massive Krorks to move with surprising speed and agility despite their enormous size. The interface between Krork and armor represented perhaps the most sophisticated aspect of their technology. Unlike Imperial power armor, which requires extensive implantation and neural links, Krork battle plate connected directly to their fungal subdermal layer through thousands of microscopic biomechanical interfaces. These connections allowed the armor to draw nutrients and energy directly from the Krork's body, while simultaneously administering combat stimulants and healing compounds as needed. The armor effectively became an extension of the Krork's biological systems, blurring the line between technology and organism. Weapons technology among the Krorks showed similar sophistication. Excavations near the Ghoul Stars have uncovered fragments of what xenotechnologists believe were Krork hand weapons, though given the size of Krorks, these hand weapons would dwarf modern heavy weapons. Analysis of these fragments reveals power generation systems capable of producing energy yields comparable to Imperial plasma weapons, but with stability mechanisms that prevented the overheating issues that plague Imperial designs. The most distinctive feature of Krork weaponry was its psycho-reactive nature. While modern Ork weapons function partly because their wielders believe they should, Krork weapons were deliberately engineered to channel and amplify this psychic energy. Crystalline focusing arrays within their gun analogs directed and shaped this energy with precision, allowing for adjustable output from precision anti-personnel fire to building demolishing blasts, all from the same weapon. This adaptability gave Krork forces tactical flexibility that modern Ork warbands can only approximate through sheer variety of crude specialized weapons. Close combat weapons recovered from ancient battlefields display equally advanced properties. What appear to be Krork melee weapons incorporate molecular disruption fields similar to, but more stable than those found in Imperial power weapons. These disruption fields were generated by psycho-conductive crystals that drew power directly from the wielder's own Wa energy, meaning the weapons became more potent in the hands of more powerful or experienced warriors. Some specimens show evidence of being able to adjust their disruption fields to counter specific types of armor or energy shields, suggesting a level of weapon sophistication that even the Adeptus Mechanicus has failed to replicate. When compared to other advanced species of the same era, Krork technology occupied a unique position in the technological spectrum. While Necron technology relied on their mastery of physical sciences and materials beyond current understanding, and Eldari technology leveraged their profound psychic connection to manipulate reality itself, Krork technology represented a hybrid approach that combined physical engineering with psychic amplification. This made their technology in some ways more adaptable than either of their contemporaries, able to function across a wider range of environments and conditions. The Necrons of the War in Heaven period possessed technology that could manipulate the fundamental laws of physics, from their infamous phase technology to weapons that could extinguish stars. By comparison, Krork technology appears crude at first glance. However, detailed analysis reveals that Krork technology incorporated principles that the Necrons never mastered, particularly the integration of biological systems with mechanical components. While Necron technology required constant maintenance and repair cycles, Krork biomechanical systems could self-heal and adapt to changing conditions without external intervention. Eldari technology of the same period relied heavily on psychic manipulation, with their most advanced weapons and tools functioning as conduits for their natural psychic abilities. Krork technology paralleled this approach, but distributed the psychic requirement across entire armies rather than requiring individually powerful psykers. This made their technology more robust in many ways, While an Eldari weapon might become useless in the hands of a non-psyker, Krork weapons would function for any Krork, drawing on the collective Wa energy of their species rather than individual psychic power. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of Krork technology was its scalability. Archaeological evidence suggests that as individual Krorks grew in size and power, their technology grew with them. The armor worn by Krork warlords wasn't merely larger versions of standard armor, but incorporated additional systems and capabilities that leveraged the enhanced psychic output of these massive specimens. This scalability extended to their vehicles and voidcraft as well, with larger Krork formations able to construct and operate increasingly sophisticated machines of war. Recovered fragments of what appear to be Krork void-capable vessels suggest propulsion systems that combined conventional plasma drives with psychic amplification arrays. These hybrid drives allowed Krork ships to achieve faster-than-light travel without requiring the sophisticated warp engines used by the Imperium or the webway access of the Eldari. Instead, their ships generated localized warp bubbles, distorting real space around the vessel to achieve effective FTL speeds while remaining primarily in the material universe, a technology that bears some resemblance to the Alcubierre drive theorized by ancient Terran physicists. The command and control systems used by Krork forces displayed a level of sophistication entirely absent in modern Ork warbands. Excavations of what appear to be Krork command bunkers have uncovered psychic amplifier arrays that allowed Krork leaders to project their tactical decisions directly into the minds of their subordinates. These psychic command networks enabled coordination across vast battlefields without requiring Vox communication or visual signals, giving Krork forces a significant advantage in complex operations. The psycho-reactive properties of Krork technology extended beyond weapons and armor to include their vehicles and infrastructure. Examination of preserved fragments suggests that Krork war machines incorporated living components that responded directly to the psychic commands of their operators. Unlike the crude mechanical controls used by modern Ork vehicles, Krork machines featured direct neural interfaces that allowed operators to control vehicles as extensions of their own bodies, resulting in response times and precision far exceeding conventional control systems. This biological integration extended to their industrial capacity as well. While modern Orks must construct crude factories and workshops to produce their weapons and vehicles, Krork manufacturing appears to have been partially biological in nature. Specialized variants, analogous to but far more sophisticated than modern mech Boyz, could cultivate and shape living factories, massive fungal growths that absorbed raw materials and extruded finished components according to the genetic templates encoded in the Krork's DNA. These biological factories could repair themselves when damaged and even relocate when threatened, giving Krork forces industrial resilience that even the Adeptus Mechanicus might envy. The Imperium has recovered several significant Krork technological artifacts over the millennia, though most remain classified at the highest levels. The most notable recovery occurred during the Rangdan Xenocides, when forces of the First Legion discovered what appeared to be a Krork weapons testing facility on a dead world near the Halo stars. The technologies recovered from this site were deemed so dangerous that the entire planet was subjected to exterminatus, but not before several artifacts were secured for study in the deepest vaults of Mars. Among these artifacts was a device Imperial technologists designated the Psychic Amplifier Matrix, a crystalline structure approximately 2 meters in diameter that appeared designed to capture, store, and direct psychic energy. Limited testing before the device was sealed away suggested it could amplify even the minor psychic emissions of a baseline human to levels approaching those of a sanctioned psyker. In the hands of the psychically potent Krorks, such devices would have allowed for manipulation of reality on a scale that would make even powerful Imperial psychers seem limited by comparison. Another significant recovery came from the explorator fleet of Mago's explorator Delphin Gruss, who discovered what appeared to be a Krork armory complex buried beneath the surface of a dead world in the Ghoul Stars region. The complex contained partially intact specimens of Krork ranged weapons, including what Gruss described in his classified report as a reality shearing cannon, a weapon that appeared designed to temporarily separate a small area of real space from the surrounding universe, effectively removing anything within that area from existence for a brief period before violently reintegrating it. The Eldari, with their long racial memory, maintain more comprehensive knowledge of Krork technology than any other extant species. Eldari myth cycles speak of green-skinned giants whose mere presence bent reality to their will, and describe weapons that roared with the voices of angry gods. While poetic, these descriptions align with the physical evidence of psycho-reactive Krork technology. Bonesinger records preserved in certain craft worlds suggest that Eldari of the War in Heaven period considered Krork technology crude but frighteningly effective, particularly in its ability to rapidly adapt to counter specific threats. The integration of Krork technology with their biology ran deeper than mere interface systems. Examination of tissue samples from preserved specimens suggests that Krorks underwent a form of biological enhancement as they grew in power and status. These enhancements included integration of technological components directly into their bodies, not crude bionics like those used by the Imperium, but seamless biomechanical systems that grew and adapted with the Krork's natural biology. The most advanced Krork warlords, according to fragmentary evidence, underwent extensive biomechanical enhancement, incorporating weapon systems and armor directly into their massive bodies. These enhancements weren't surgically implanted, but grown from the Krork's own tissues, guided by the genetic templates encoded in their DNA and accelerated by their connection to the WA field. The result was a living weapon system that combined the adaptability of biological organisms with the power and precision of advanced technology. This integration extended to their cognitive capabilities as well. While modern Orks rely primarily on instinct and simple tactical understanding, Krork leaders appear to have incorporated computational systems into their enhanced brains. These systems, composed of bioelectrical neural networks grown throughout their cranial cavities, allowed them to process battlefield information at rates comparable to advanced cogitator systems, giving them tactical awareness far beyond what their modern descendants can achieve. AI Magos Dariak Grendhull II, who examined a partial Krork skull recovered from the fringes of the Octarius sector, reported finding what appeared to be a crystalline memory storage system embedded within the bone structure itself. This system, which remained partially functional even after millions of years, contained what the Magos described as tactical simulations of staggering complexity, suggesting that Krork leaders could run predictive battle models within their enhanced minds, anticipating enemy movements and planning countermeasures with precision that would impress even the most skilled Imperial tacticians. The technological sophistication of the Krorks represents one of the most significant losses of knowledge in galactic history. Had they maintained their original form rather than degrading into the modern Orks, they would undoubtedly rank among the most technologically advanced species in the current galaxy. The fact that even their degraded descendants can pose a serious threat to Imperial worlds with crude imitations of ancient Krork technology speaks to the remarkable engineering that went into their creation. Following the War in Heaven, the Krork civilization expanded across vast swathes of the galaxy, establishing what xenohistorians have tentatively termed the Krork domains. Without the guiding presence of the Old Ones, the Krorks nevertheless maintained a sophisticated civilization that spanned thousands of star systems. Archaeological evidence suggests their influence extended from what is now the Ghoul Stars region to areas deep within Segmentum Tempestus, with outposts discovered as far as the galactic core. The extent of Krork territorial control during this period cannot be precisely determined, but recovered star charts from Eldari ruins indicate that approximately 35% of the galaxy fell under some form of Krork influence. This vast territory wasn't uniformly controlled. Rather, it consisted of heavily fortified core worlds surrounded by bands of frontier planets where Krork presence was more military than civilian in nature. Between these regions lay buffer zones where other species were permitted to exist, provided they supplied resources and acknowledged Krork dominance. Mago's xenohistorian Velik Tarn, who spent decades studying patterns of ancient ruins across the Ultima Segmentum, identified distinct architectural patterns that suggest the Krork civilization organized itself into roughly 5 major territorial blocks, each centered around a fortress world of immense proportions. The largest of these, located in what is now the Octarius sector, appears to have been the central hub of their interstellar empire, with massive orbital structures that dwarfed even the largest Imperial space stations. Unlike the relatively flat hierarchy of modern Ork society, the Krork social structure displayed remarkable complexity and specialization. At the pinnacle stood the prime Krorks, immense specimens standing 12–15 meters tall, whose sophisticated armor and weaponry integrated seamlessly with their enhanced biology. These beings combined the roles of military commander, political leader, and spiritual figure, directing the activities of billions of lesser Krorks through a combination of psychic dominance and genetically encoded authority. Below the prime Krorks existed a stratified caste system, organized primarily by size and specialized function. The war Krorks formed the military elite, standing 8–10 meters tall and equipped with devastating personal weaponry. These beings commanded battlefield operations and led the massive assault forces that characterized Krork military action. Each war Krork typically commanded a force of several thousand lesser Krorks, organized into formations that combined different specialized types for maximum tactical flexibility. The Builder Krorks represented perhaps the most significant difference between ancient Krork society and modern Ork culture. These specialized variants, standing 7–9 meters tall, possessed enhanced brain structures dedicated to technological comprehension and engineering. Unlike modern mechboys, who work largely through instinct and trial and error, Builder Krorks demonstrated systematic understanding of advanced principles in physics, materials science, and energy manipulation. They designed and constructed the massive fortress cities that served as the centers of Krork civilization, as well as the formidable war machines that extended Krork military power across the stars. The healer Krorks fulfilled functions similar to modern painboys, but with far greater sophistication. Standing 6–8 meters tall, these specialists possessed additional limbs with extraordinary dexterity and enhanced sensory organs, capable of detecting microscopic abnormalities in Krork physiology. They maintained the biological health of Krork populations through a combination of surgical intervention and cultivation of specialized medicinal fungi that enhanced the already remarkable Krork regenerative capabilities. Beneath these specialized castes existed the bulk of Krork society, the warrior Krorks. Standing 5–7 meters tall, these beings formed the main military force of the Krork domains. Unlike modern Ork boys, who fight with minimal coordination and tactical awareness, warrior Krorks operated in disciplined formations, executing complex battlefield maneuvers with precision that would impress even Imperial Guard commanders. Each warrior Krork carried weapons and wore armor that would require heavy weapons teams to transport in modern armies, giving even their basic infantry formations firepower equivalent to modern armored companies. At the lowest tier of Krork society stood the worker Krorks, specimens of 3–5 meters who handled resource extraction, basic manufacturing, and agricultural cultivation. Despite being the smallest adult Krorks, these beings still towered over modern Orks and possessed strength sufficient to manually move multi-ton objects. Worker Krorks typically outnumbered all other castes, combined by a factor of approximately 5–1, forming the economic foundation upon which the military superstructure of Krork society was built. The psychic leadership caste of the Krork civilization represented perhaps its most sophisticated aspect. Unlike modern Orks, whose connection to the Wa energy remains largely unconscious and undirected, the prime Krorks and specialized seer Krorks could consciously manipulate this psychic field, with precision approaching that of trained Eldari farseers. This ability allowed them to coordinate the activities of billions of Krorks across thousands of light years, creating a unified empire despite the limitations of conventional communication technology. Krorks, specialized variants standing 9-11 meters tall, possessed enhanced brain structures dedicated to psychic perception and manipulation. These beings served as advisors to the Prime Krorks and commanders of specialized psychic warfare units. Their enhanced connection to the WA field allowed them to perceive events occurring light years away, predict enemy movements with uncanny accuracy, and even manipulate probability fields to favor Krork military operations. In battle, Krorks could unleash devastating psychic attacks that rivaled those of the most powerful Eldari warlocks, though with less finesse and greater raw destructive potential. The psychic network maintained by these leadership castes served multiple crucial functions in Krork civilization. First, it provided near-instantaneous communication across vast distances, allowing coordination of military and economic activities on a galactic scale. Second, it reinforced the genetic memory system that preserved technical knowledge and cultural traditions, ensuring that specialized knowledge wasn't lost despite the relatively short individual lifespans of even the largest Krorks. Third, it amplified the reality warping effects of the WA field, making Krork technology more effective and reliable than the crude approximations used by their modern descendants. This psychic network centered around massive amplifier structures constructed on major Krork worlds. These structures, combining aspects of biological growth and precision engineering, stood hundreds of meters tall and contained crystalline matrices that captured and focused the psychic emissions of the surrounding Krork population. The largest of these, located on what xenoarchaeologists believe was the Krork throne world, could reportedly be seen from orbit as a glowing green spire that pulsed in rhythm with the collective heartbeat of the planet's Krork inhabitants. The military organization of the Krork Empire reflected a level of sophistication entirely absent in modern Ork warbands. Rather than the loose collections of fighters that characterize current Ork military activity, Krork forces operated in precisely defined formations, with specialized units fulfilling complementary roles. A typical Krork army group consisted of multiple divisions, each comprising approximately 100,000 warrior Krorks supported by specialized assault, siege, and support formations. Command structures within these massive forces followed a rigid hierarchy based on size and experience. War Krorks commanded divisions and army groups, while particularly large and experienced warrior Krorks led smaller formations down to the equivalent of company level. Unlike modern Ork leadership, which relies primarily on personal strength and intimidation, Krork military command incorporated sophisticated tactical planning and strategic coordination facilitated by their psychic network. The equipment utilized by these vast armies far exceeded the crude weaponry of modern Orks. Standard warrior Krorks carried energy weapons with output comparable to Imperial plasma guns, but lacking the overheating issues that plague Imperial designs. Their armor incorporated reactive systems that stiffened in response to impacts and self-sealed when damaged. The most elite formations wielded weapons that could level hive cities or crack open void shields through sustained fire, while their armor could withstand direct hits from weapons that would vaporize modern tanks. Vehicle formations within Krork armies demonstrated similar sophistication. Rather than the ramshackle construction of modern Ork vehicles, Krork war machines featured precision engineering and advanced energy management systems. Their equivalent of battle tanks combined the firepower of Imperial baneblades with the speed and maneuverability of lighter vehicles, while their largest land units, massive walking fortresses controlled by directly integrated war Krorks, could devastate entire continents in protracted campaigns. Population estimates for the Krork Empire at its height suggest numbers that dwarf even the teeming masses of humanity in the current millennium. Based on the carrying capacity of confirmed Krork worlds and the efficiency of their fungal agriculture systems, xenobiologists estimate that the total Krork population likely exceeded 300 trillion individuals spread across thousands of fully developed worlds. This vast population provided not only immense military manpower, but also the industrial capacity to equip and support the largest army the galaxy has ever witnessed. The military strength derived from this population defies easy comprehension. Conservative estimates suggest that the Krork Empire could field combat forces numbering in the tens of trillions, a military establishment larger than the combined armed forces of every other species in the current galaxy. These forces were distributed across multiple fronts, containing residual Necron activity, expanding into new territories, and maintaining internal security within their vast domains. Fleet assets supporting these ground forces included millions of void-capable vessels, ranging from small system defense craft to massive dreadnoughts that could devastate entire planetary systems. Unlike the cobbled-together space hulks used by modern Orks, Krork voidcraft featured sophisticated propulsion systems, void shields comparable to those used by Imperial battleships, and weapons batteries that could crack planetary crusts with sustained bombardment. Their largest vessels, command ships used by Prime Krorks to coordinate multi-system campaigns, stretched several kilometers in length and contained entire ecosystems, supporting tens of thousands of crew members. The economic foundation supporting this vast military establishment operated with efficiency unimaginable in modern Ork society. Specialized agricultural worlds cultivated massive fungal forests that produced nutrients capable of supporting trillions of Krorks, while mining operations extracted resources from entire planetary systems using technology that could harvest asteroids in days rather than the years required by Imperial mining operations. Manufacturing worlds featured sprawling factory organisms that absorbed raw materials and exuded finished weapons, vehicles, and equipment at rates that would require dozens of forge worlds to match. Trade networks connected these specialized worlds, creating an integrated economy spanning thousands of light years. Unlike the barter system used by modern Orks, Krork commerce operated through a sophisticated resource allocation system directed by Builder Krorks and overseen by the Psychic Leadership Caste. This system ensured that military forces received priority access to resources while maintaining sufficient distribution to civilian populations to prevent internal unrest. The technological base supporting the Krork Empire combined aspects of biological growth and precision engineering in ways that remain beyond Imperial comprehension. Their manufacturing processes grew components from specialized fungal templates, producing complex machinery with atomic-level precision without requiring the elaborate forge systems used by the Adeptus Mechanicus. This biomechanical technology could self-repair when damaged and adapt to changing operational requirements without requiring complete redesign. Communication systems linking the disparate regions of Krork territory utilized a combination of conventional electromagnetic transmission and psychic amplification. While limited by the speed of light for detailed information transfer, the psychic network maintained by the leadership caste could transmit simple concepts and emergency alerts instantaneously across thousands of light years, allowing for strategic coordination on a scale that even the Imperium struggles to achieve with its astropathic choir. Transportation networks within Krork territory utilized a system of stable warp corridors, maintained by arrays of psychic amplifiers positioned at strategic points throughout their domain. These corridors allowed for faster-than-light travel, without requiring the dangerous direct warp exposure used by Imperial ships or the limited access points of the Eldari webway. While slower than optimal warp travel, these corridors provided reliable, safe passage that enabled the movement of massive forces across interstellar distances with minimal loss. Following the cataclysmic conclusion of the War in Heaven, the nascent Krork civilization faced a threat perhaps more insidious than even the Necrons and their Khatan masters. As the Old Ones' power waned and their numbers dwindled, the psychic disruption caused by their decline created ripples through the Imperium. These disturbances in the fabric of reality opened pathways for entities that had previously been unable to manifest in real space, the creatures now known as Enslavers. The Enslaver Plague, as xenohistorians have termed it, began approximately 60 million years ago, coinciding with the final phases of the War in Heaven. Eldari historical records, preserved in crystalline matrices within the oldest craft worlds, described the initial manifestations as isolated incidents, lone psykers suddenly transforming into fleshy, pulsating gateways from which tentacled horrors emerged. These early manifestations were initially dismissed as localized phenomena, perhaps the result of experimental weapons deployed by the increasingly desperate Necrons. The true nature of the threat became apparent when entire worlds began falling silent. Investigation forces dispatched by both Eldari and Krork commanders discovered planets where all sentient life had been converted into biological portals, their minds enslaved, and their bodies transformed to serve as living gateways for the entities to pour through into real space. These worlds became nightmare realms, where the laws of physics bent to accommodate the partial manifestation of the Imperium. For the Krorks, the enslaver threat represented a fundamentally different challenge than the Necrons had posed. The Necrons were a material enemy. Their technology, while advanced beyond comprehension, still operated according to physical principles. Their weapons, while devastating, destroyed bodies rather than corrupting souls. The enslavers, by contrast, attacked through the mind, turning a population's own psychic potential against it, and using the victims as conduits for further invasion. The Krorks' genetic memory banks, encoded with combat protocols against nearly every conceivable material threat, contained limited information on countering psychic predators of this nature. The Old Ones, in their haste to create effective warriors against the Necrons, had emphasized physical resilience and technological aptitude over psychic defense. This oversight now threatened their creation's continued existence. Initial Krork responses to enslaver incursions proved catastrophically ineffective. Conventional military tactics, overwhelming firepower, massed assaults, and defensive fortifications failed against an enemy that could simply bypass material barriers by corrupting the minds of defenders. Entire Krork battle groups disappeared after making planetfall on supposedly secured worlds, their psychic signatures vanishing from the WA network as their minds fell under enslaver control. The threat posed by the enslavers was particularly severe because of the nature of the Krork psychic field. While individual Krorks generated relatively weak psychic emanations compared to the Eldari, their collective psychic presence, the foundation of their WA energy, created a powerful beacon in the Imperium. Enslaver entities, drawn to concentrations of psychic energy, found the massive Krork population centers irresistible targets. The very psychic network that had given the Krorks their advantage against the Necrons now made them vulnerable to this new enemy. Inquisitorial records recovered from the personal archive of Ordo Xeno's Inquisitor Bronislaw Chevak suggest that the Krorks developed a three-tiered strategic response to the enslaver threat. These records, based on Chevak's unauthorized access to Trajan's galleries on Solemnis, provide the most comprehensive understanding of how the ancient Krorks adapted to combat this psychic predator. The first tier of response involved biological adaptation. Specialized healer Krorks, working with genetic material preserved from the Old Ones' laboratories, developed a modified strain of Krork with significantly reduced psychic emissions. These null Krorks, as Chevak's translation terms them, generated a localized dampening field that interfered with the enslaver's ability to establish psychic dominance. While this adaptation reduced the effectiveness of these specialized Krorks against conventional enemies by limiting their connection to the WA field, it made them ideal shock troops against enslaver-controlled worlds. Archaeological evidence supporting the existence of these null Krorks comes from excavations on Gull Prime, a dead world in the Ultima Segmentum. Expeditions led by Magos Biologus Hextus Varn in the 37th Millennium uncovered remains of what appeared to be specialized Krork warriors with unusual cranial modifications. Analysis of these skull fragments revealed structures similar to those found in human blanks, individuals with negligible warp presence. These specimens showed evidence of deliberate genetic modification rather than natural mutation, suggesting a calculated response to the enslaver threat. The second tier of the Krork response involved technological countermeasures. Builder Krorks developed devices that generated interference patterns in the local Imperium, creating zones where enslaver control weakened or broke entirely. These psychic jammers operated by projecting a discordant energy signature that disrupted the harmonic frequencies used by enslavers to maintain control over their hosts. The technology bears some resemblance to the Geller fields used by Imperial ships to traverse the warp, though operating on different principles and for different purposes. Fragments of these devices have been recovered from various sites throughout the galaxy, often misidentified as unknown Xenos artifacts of uncertain purpose. The most intact specimen, discovered during the Damocles Gulf Crusade and subsequently studied by Ordo Xenos technographers, consisted of a crystalline lattice surrounding a core of unknown material that appeared to shift between solid and gaseous states in a regular pattern. When partially activated by exposure to psychic energy, the device produced measurable distortions in local warp-sensitive instrumentation before catastrophically failing. The third and most drastic tier of response involved strategic withdrawal and scorched earth tactics. Recognizing that worlds with high concentrations of psychically active populations presented irresistible targets for enslaver incursion, the Krork leadership implemented protocols for rapid evacuation of threatened systems, followed by complete sterilization of the abandoned worlds. This approach sacrificed territory to preserve fighting strength, a concept alien to modern Ork mentality, but entirely logical within the more sophisticated strategic framework of ancient Krork civilization. Evidence of these scorched earth operations appears in the geological record of numerous dead worlds throughout the galaxy. Planets that show signs of ancient habitation followed by catastrophic, artificially induced extinction events dating to the immediate post-war in Heaven period number in the thousands. Many bear the distinctive radiation signatures of weapons far more powerful than anything in the current Imperial arsenal, suggesting the deployment of planet-killing devices specifically designed to eliminate all potential enslaver hosts without leaving recoverable biomass. The tactical adaptations employed by Krork forces when directly engaging enslaver-controlled worlds demonstrated a level of flexibility rarely associated with their modern descendants. Rather than relying on the massed infantry assaults that had proven effective against Necron forces, Krork commanders developed specialized strike teams combining null Krorks with conventional forces in carefully calibrated ratios. These teams would target the primary enslaver entities controlling a population, severing the psychic connection and allowing conventional forces to eliminate the now disoriented hosts. Recovered fragmentary battle records from this period, preserved in ancient data crystals found on the fringes of the Ghoul stars, describe operations involving small teams of heavily armored null Krorks supported by long-range fire from conventional forces positioned outside the range of enslaver influence. These teams would penetrate deep into enslaver-controlled territory, locate the primary controlling entities, and eliminate them with specialized weapons designed to affect creatures existing partially in the Imperium. Once the controlling influence was removed, conventional forces would move in to purge the remaining hosts before they could be reclaimed by other enslaver entities. The weapons developed specifically for anti-enslaver operations represented some of the most sophisticated technology created by the Krork civilization. Unlike conventional weapons that affected only material targets, these specialized devices could damage entities existing simultaneously in real space and the Imperium. The technology behind these weapons remains largely incomprehensible to Imperial scholars, though certain radical inquisitors have suggested similarities to the force weapons used by Space Marine librarians and Grey Knights. The most detailed description of these anti-enslaver weapons comes from the personal journal of rogue trader Percival Winterscale, who claimed to have discovered an intact specimen in the ruins of an ancient structure on the edge of the Halo stars. Before the artifact was confiscated by Ordo Xenos agents, Winterscale described it as a crystalline spear approximately 2 meters in length, with a core of shifting energies that appeared to respond to psychic stimuli by producing counterharmonic frequencies. His Tech Priest's analysis suggested the weapon was designed to disrupt the specific warp frequencies used by enslaver entities to maintain their connection to real space. Despite these adaptations, the enslaver plague took a devastating toll on the nascent Krork civilization. Population centers that had survived the war in Heaven intact fell one after another as the psychic predators spread throughout the galaxy. The very concentration of psychic energy that made Krork society function efficiently also made it vulnerable to enslaver predation. Larger Krorks, with their more developed psychic connections to the WA field, proved particularly susceptible to enslaver control, decimating the leadership castes that had maintained the sophisticated social structures of post-war Krork civilization. The loss of these leadership castes had profound implications for Krork society. Without the guiding influence of prime Krorks and their direct subordinates, the psychic network that had coordinated activities across thousands of light years began to fragment. Regional commanders, cut off from central authority, implemented increasingly divergent strategies based on local conditions and their own genetic predispositions. The unified Krork civilization began to fracture into isolated pockets, each developing along slightly different evolutionary paths. This fragmentation accelerated the degradation process that would eventually transform the sophisticated Krorks into the comparatively primitive Orks of the current millennium. Without the stabilizing influence of the psychic leadership network, the genetic memory system began to lose fidelity with each generation. Complex technological knowledge simplified into basic instinctual understanding, sophisticated strategic concepts devolved into straightforward aggression, and the nuanced social structures collapsed into the crude, might makes right hierarchy seen in modern Ork society. The enslaver plague eventually subsided as the psychic entities, having consumed or driven off the most potent psychic populations, found fewer suitable hosts to support their manifestation in real space. By this time, however, the damage to Krork civilization was irreversible. The species had been driven from its core worlds, its leadership decimated, and its technological base fragmented beyond recovery. The surviving populations, scattered across isolated regions of the galaxy, began the long, slow process of devolution that would eventually produce the modern greenskin species. Not all Krork populations degraded at the same rate, however. In regions where conflict remained intense, such as the borders of expanding Necron tomb worlds or areas contested by the emerging Eldari Empire, evolutionary pressure maintained more of the original Krork characteristics. These populations retained greater size, intelligence, and technological capability than their counterparts in more peaceful regions, creating the first distinctions between what would eventually become different greenskin subspecies. The most interesting adaptation to emerge from this period was the apparent reduction in overall psychic potential among surviving Krork populations. While maintaining sufficient connection to the WA field to support their technology and social structures, post-enslaver Krorks exhibited significantly lower individual psychic signatures than their predecessors. This adaptation, likely a direct response to the selection pressure imposed by enslaver predation, reduced their vulnerability to psychic domination while preserving the essential characteristics that define them as a species. This reduction in psychic potential may explain one of the most puzzling aspects of modern Ork psychology, their remarkable resistance to chaos corruption. Despite generating enormous amounts of psychic energy through their WA field, Orks rarely fall to the temptations of the ruinous powers or suffer from the possession and mutation that plagues human psychers. This resistance, absent in many other psychically active species, may represent the last echo of adaptations developed during the ancient war against the enslavers. The disappearance of the Old Ones created a leadership vacuum that reverberated throughout the Krork civilization. Without their creators' guiding influence, the psychic network that had united the vast Krork domains began to show signs of strain. The prime Krorks, who had previously acted as conduits for Old One directives, found themselves forced to make independent strategic decisions for which their genetically programmed minds were not fully optimized. Archaeological evidence from this period shows increasing fortification of regional command centers, suggesting a shift from coordinated offensive operations to defensive posturing. The massive orbital platforms that had served as staging areas for galaxy-spanning campaigns were gradually repurposed as defensive installations, their weapons oriented inward toward Krork-controlled space rather than outward toward external threats. The first major fracture in Krork leadership occurred approximately 50 million years ago, when a coalition of war Krorks in what is now Segmentum Tempestus rejected the authority of the prime Krorks based in the galactic core. Excavations on 8 Shrud blighted worlds in this region have uncovered battlefield sites where Krork fought Krork with weapons of terrifying destructive capacity. The radiation signatures from these ancient conflicts remain detectable even today, suggesting the deployment of weapons that altered the fundamental atomic structure of the surrounding terrain. This initial schism triggered a cascade of similar breakaway movements throughout Krork-controlled space. Regional commanders, their connection to the central psychic network weakened by distance and increasing psychic background noise, established independent domains governed by their own interpretations of the fragmented genetic directives left by the Old Ones. Within 10 million years of the Old One's disappearance, the once unified Krork civilization had splintered into hundreds of competing territories, each controlled by increasingly divergent Krork subspecies. The genetic degradation that accompanied this political fragmentation represents one of the most significant aspects of the Krork decline. Without the stabilizing influence of Old One biotechnology, the sophisticated genetic structures that had defined the Krork species began to show signs of entropy. The most immediate effect was seen in the reproductive system, where the precisely calibrated spore production that had allowed for the creation of specialized castes became increasingly random and uncontrolled. Mago's biologist Hextus Varn, analyzing spore samples recovered from various strata of excavation sites, documented a clear progression of degradation in the genetic coding mechanisms. The earliest post-war samples showed only minor deviations from the original template, perhaps a 2–3% reduction in information density within the spore nuclei. By 30 million years ago, this degradation had accelerated to approximately 15%, with particularly severe losses in the genetic sequences governing higher cognitive functions and specialized physiological development. The impact of this degradation became apparent in the physical characteristics of successive Krork generations. The massive prime Krorks, once standing 15 meters tall with proportionate physical and mental capabilities, began to produce offspring that reached only 12–13 meters. By 40 million years ago, even the largest Krork leaders rarely exceeded 10 meters, with corresponding reductions in cognitive capacity and technological aptitude. This reduction in size coincided with a simplification of the caste system. The highly specialized variants, Builder Krorks, Healer Krorks, and Seer Krorks, became increasingly rare as the genetic templates for their creation degraded. By 35 million years ago, many Krork populations had effectively collapsed into just 2 castes, leaders and warriors, with specialized functions emerging through environmental adaptation rather than deliberate genetic programming. The loss of the Builder Krork caste had particularly devastating consequences for Krork technological capabilities. Without these specialized engineers, the maintenance of advanced technology became increasingly difficult. Complex machinery that required precise calibration and replacement of sophisticated components began to fail across Krork domains. As these systems failed, the knowledge required to repair them was gradually lost, preserved only in increasingly corrupted genetic memory that fewer Krorks could access completely. The most visible manifestation of this technological regression can be observed in Krork armor and weapons technology. Artifacts recovered from the earliest post-war period show precision engineering and sophisticated energy management systems. By 30 million years later, equipment of similar function showed significantly cruder construction, with complex components replaced by simpler, less efficient alternatives. The psychoconductive materials that had allowed for direct neural interface with equipment became increasingly rare, replaced by crude mechanical controls that required physical manipulation. Examination of weapons from successive periods shows a similar pattern of degradation. The earliest post-war weapons utilized sophisticated energy projection systems, capable of adjustable output and precision targeting. Later examples show progressively simpler designs with fixed output and reduced accuracy, relying on increased size and raw power to compensate for lost efficiency. By 25 million years after the War in Heaven, many Krork populations had reverted to primarily physical weapons, supplemented by crude energy systems, foreshadowing the choppa/shoota dichotomy seen in modern Ork arsenals. The loss of technological understanding wasn't merely a matter of forgotten techniques or misplaced blueprints. The Krorks' technology had been intimately connected to their biology, with many systems designed to interface directly with their neural pathways and psychic field. As their biology simplified through genetic degradation, their ability to interface with their most sophisticated technology diminished correspondingly. Equipment that had once responded to subtle psychic commands now sat inert, its control systems incomprehensible to the increasingly primitive Krork mind. Inquisitor Mar of the Ordo Xenos theorized that this technological regression created a self-reinforcing cycle of degradation. As technology failed, Krork populations became more dependent on their natural biological capabilities, reducing the selection pressure that had maintained their more sophisticated adaptations. Without the enhancement provided by advanced technology, the massive size and energy requirements of the largest Krorks became evolutionary disadvantages rather than assets, accelerating the trend towards smaller, simpler specimens. Perhaps the most profound loss during this period was the degradation of the psychic network that had united Krork civilization. The sophisticated psychic amplifiers that had allowed for galaxy-spanning communication fell into disrepair as the builder Krorks who maintained them disappeared. Without these amplifiers, the range and clarity of psychic communication diminished dramatically, forcing Krork populations to rely on more primitive forms of coordination. This communication breakdown accelerated the fragmentation of Krork society into increasingly isolated populations. Without regular contact with other groups, each population began to develop distinct characteristics based on local conditions and random genetic drift. The unified Krork species gradually splintered into numerous subspecies, each adapted to their specific environment but sharing the same fundamental greenskin biology. The emergence of tribal warfare among these isolated populations marked the transition from degraded Krorks to what xenobiologists classify as proto-Orks. As the sophisticated social structures of Krork civilization collapsed, they were replaced by simpler hierarchies based primarily on physical size and combat prowess. Leadership positions, once determined by a combination of genetic programming and psychic potential, became the prize of victory in personal combat. These tribal conflicts differed fundamentally from the coordinated military operations of the Krork Empire. Where Krork warfare had been characterized by strategic objectives and sophisticated tactics, Proto-Ork tribal warfare centered around immediate goals, territory, resources, and dominance displays. Battle became less a means to an end and more an end in itself, the first emergence of the characteristic Orkish love of fighting for its own sake. Archaeological evidence of this transition appears in settlement patterns from approximately 20 million years ago. Early Krork settlements showed clear urban planning, with specialized structures arranged in logical patterns to maximize efficiency. Proto-Ork settlements from later periods display haphazard organization, with fortifications and weapon emplacements taking precedence over infrastructure and production facilities. The sophisticated agricultural systems that had supported dense Krork populations were largely abandoned, replaced by simpler foraging and hunting, supplemented by crude cultivation of fungal food sources. The weapons and equipment used in these tribal conflicts reflected the continuing technological degradation. Artifacts recovered from battlefield sites show increasing use of scavenged components from older, more sophisticated devices, a practice that would eventually evolve into the characteristic Orkish habit of looting and repurposing technology from other species. The careful maintenance and systematic improvement that had characterized Krork technology gave way to expedient repairs and improvised modifications, prioritizing immediate functionality over efficiency or safety. This period also saw the first emergence of the bigger is better philosophy that dominates modern Ork technological thinking. As the sophisticated understanding of engineering principles faded from genetic memory, it was replaced by a simpler approach that equated size and noise with effectiveness. Weapons became larger and more bombastic. Vehicles incorporated increasingly excessive armor and weaponry, without regard for weight distribution or power requirements, and settlements featured oversized defensive structures that consumed resources disproportionate to their practical value. The final stage in the transition from Krork to Ork can be observed in the changing relationship between the greenskins and their technology. Where Krorks had understood and controlled their advanced devices through a combination of genetic memory and psychic interface, Proto-Orks increasingly relied on what xenotechnologists term Gestalt field effects, the unconscious psychic influence that allows Ork technology to function despite apparent mechanical impossibilities. This shift represented both adaptation and loss. While the Gestalt field effect allowed Proto-Orks to maintain some technological capability despite their reduced cognitive capacity, it also marked the final abandonment of true understanding. Technology became something that worked because they believed it should work, rather than because they comprehended the principles behind its operation. This transition, completing approximately 15 million years ago, marks the conventional boundary between Proto-Orks and the recognizable ancestors of modern Orkoid species. The devolution from Krork to Ork wasn't uniform across the galaxy. In regions where conflict remained intense, such as the borders of expanding Necron tomb worlds or areas contested by the rising Eldari Empire, evolutionary pressure maintained more of the original Krork characteristics. These populations retained greater size, intelligence, and technological capability than their counterparts in more peaceful regions, creating the first distinctions between what would eventually become different greenskin subspecies. The most advanced of these remnant populations clustered around the galactic core, where the density of habitable worlds and the presence of both Eldari and awakening Necron forces created constant warfare. These populations maintained a closer approximation of Krork's social structure and technology, with recognizable caste systems and relatively sophisticated equipment. Isolated from the broader currents of greenskin evolution, they would eventually develop into the beast orcs encountered by the Imperium during the War of the Beast, a temporary resurgence of Krork-like characteristics under extreme evolutionary pressure. The vast majority of greenskin populations, however, continued their devolution into increasingly primitive forms. By 10 million years ago, most had reached a technological and social level comparable to modern feral orcs, with only the largest and most successful tribes maintaining any significant technological capability. The sophisticated genetic memory that had preserved Krork knowledge became increasingly fragmented, preserved primarily in the instinctual abilities of specialized variants like mech-Boyz and pain-Boyz, rather than as accessible information. This devolution wasn't entirely disadvantageous from an evolutionary perspective. The smaller, simpler orcs required fewer resources to sustain themselves and could reproduce more rapidly than their Krork ancestors. Their reduced psychic signature made them less vulnerable to warp predation, while their simplified social structure proved more resilient to leadership losses. What they lost in sophisticated capability, they gained in adaptability and resilience, characteristics that would ensure their survival through the tumultuous history of the galaxy. The most significant insight into true Krork physiology came not through archaeological excavation or fragmentary historical records, but through the direct observation of a preserved specimen, an opportunity that arose during Fabius Bile's infamous expedition to Solemnus. The renegade apothecary of the Emperor's children, during his temporary alliance with Trazyn the Infinite, encountered what remains the only complete Krork specimen known to have been seen by human eyes in the current millennium. Bile's personal journals, portions of which were recovered following a raid on one of his hidden laboratories in the Gothic sector, describe his first sight of the preserved Krork in clinical yet revealing detail. The specimen stood approximately 12 meters tall, encased in sophisticated armor that appeared to blend seamlessly with its massive green-hued body. Unlike the crude, hunched posture of modern orcs, the Krork stood with a straight-backed military bearing that suggested not just physical power but disciplined purpose. The armor worn by this ancient warrior differed fundamentally from the cobbled-together scrap metal favored by modern orc knobs and warbosses. Each plate fit precisely against the next, creating a seamless protective shell with no exposed joints or vulnerable points. The material composition, according to Boyz analysis, incorporated ceramite-like compounds reinforced with unknown crystalline structures that distributed impact forces throughout the entire armor system, rather than absorbing them at the point of contact. Most striking was the integration between the armor and the Krorks' biology. Where modern orcs simply strap armor plates to their bodies, this ancient specimen's armor connected directly to its musculature through thousands of microscopic interface points. These connections allowed the armor to move in perfect synchronization with the wearer's body, while simultaneously monitoring physiological status and administering combat stimulants as needed. The helmet design particularly impressed Boyz, who noted its sophisticated sensor array and integrated targeting systems. Unlike the crude visors or exposed heads of modern orcs, the Krork helmet featured multiple overlapping sensory inputs that provided comprehensive battlefield awareness. Crystalline lenses positioned around the helmet's circumference eliminated blind spots, while specialized receptors detected energy emissions across a spectrum far broader than human vision. The weapons carried by the preserved Krork demonstrated equally advanced design principles. The primary armament resembled an oversized rifle, but internal scans revealed energy projection systems far more sophisticated than Imperial plasma technology. The weapon incorporated multiple redundant power sources and cooling systems that would prevent the overheating issues plaguing Imperial plasma weapons, allowing for sustained fire without risk of catastrophic failure. Close examination of the weapon's internal components revealed psycho-conductive materials integrated throughout its structure. These materials, arranged in precise geometric patterns, appeared designed to channel and amplify the user's latent psychic energy, enhancing the weapon's already formidable output. Unlike the crude works because we believe it works technology of modern orcs, this weapon represented a deliberate engineering approach to harnessing the Wa energy for practical combat application. The secondary weapon, a massive close combat blade, incorporated similar psycho-conductive elements within its crystalline structure. The edge, maintained at a molecular level sharpness, could theoretically cut through even ceramite armor with minimal resistance. More impressively, the blade contained internal energy channels that could project a disruption field similar to, but more stable than those found in Imperial power weapons, giving it the capability to slice through energy shields and force fields. Beyond the weapons and armor, the physical characteristics of the Krork itself provided crucial insights into the species' original form. The musculature density exceeded that of modern orcs by approximately 40%, with specialized fiber structures that allowed for both explosive strength and sustained endurance. The skeletal system incorporated crystalline reinforcement at major stress points, creating a framework that could support the creature's massive weight while withstanding impacts that would shatter conventional bones. The cranial structure revealed the most significant differences between ancient Krorks and their modern descendants. The preserved specimen's skull contained a brain approximately 3 times larger than that of even the most developed orc warboss, with expanded frontal and temporal lobes suggesting significantly higher cognitive function. Neural pathways throughout the brain showed specialized structures dedicated to tactical analysis, technological comprehension, and complex language processing, capabilities largely absent in modern orcs. Boyz's examination of the specimen's hands revealed another crucial difference. Where modern orcs possess strong but relatively crude digits, the Krork's hands showed remarkable dexterity despite their massive size. The finger joints allowed for precise manipulation of complex equipment, while the palm contained specialized tactile sensors that could detect minute variations in pressure and texture. These adaptations would have enabled the handling and maintenance of sophisticated technology far beyond the capabilities of modern orcs. The genetic material preserved within the specimen provided perhaps the most valuable information. Analysis revealed a genome approximately 15% more complex than that of modern Orks, with extensive redundant systems and error correction mechanisms that would prevent the genetic drift seen in current greenskin populations. The DNA structure incorporated specialized sequences that appeared designed for information storage, the biological foundation of the sophisticated genetic memory system that preserved Krork technical knowledge and cultural traditions. Most intriguing was the discovery of what Boyz termed activation sequences within the Krork genome, genetic triggers designed to express different traits in response to specific environmental conditions. These sequences appeared to control everything from physical growth to cognitive development, allowing Krorks to adapt rapidly to changing battlefield conditions without requiring conventional evolution over multiple generations. The preservation technology employed by Trazyn had maintained the specimen in a state of suspended animation rather than true death, allowing for analysis of active biological processes. This revealed the sophisticated symbiotic relationship between the Krork's cellular structures and the fungal organisms integrated throughout its body. Unlike the relatively simple relationship seen in modern Orks, this symbiosis operated at a molecular level, with fungal structures directly enhancing cellular function in ways that blurred the distinction between host and symbiont. The implications of this preserved specimen extend far beyond academic xenobiology. The technological sophistication displayed by the armor and weapons suggests that at their peak, Krorks possessed military capability that would rival or exceed that of the Imperium at its height. The neural complexity and evidence of higher cognitive function indicate a species capable of sophisticated strategic planning and technological innovation, rather than the crude brutality that characterizes modern Ork warfare. Perhaps most concerning for Imperial strategists, the activation sequences discovered within the Krork genome suggest that the potential for reversion to something approaching their original form remains dormant within modern Ork populations. Under sufficient evolutionary pressure, such as prolonged conflict against a powerful adversary, these sequences could theoretically activate, triggering a transformation from the relatively manageable Ork threat to something approaching the ancient Krorks in size, intelligence, and technological capability. This possibility hasn't escaped the attention of the Ordo Xenos. Following the events of the War of the Beast, when the Imperium faced Orks of unprecedented size and sophistication, inquisitorial researchers have monitored greenskin populations for signs of accelerated evolution. The emergence of Primordial Origin, whose tactical acumen and organizational ability far exceed typical Ork leaders, has raised particular concern among those familiar with the Solemnis specimen. The technological implications of the preserved Krork extend beyond weapons and armor. The integration of biological and mechanical systems seen in the specimen suggests an approach to technology fundamentally different from both Imperial and Mechanicus traditions. Where human technology remains distinct from human biology, Krork technology appears to have been conceived as a direct extension of their biological systems, blurring the line between organism and machine. This biomechanical integration manifested most clearly in the armor interfaces, which connected directly to the Krork's nervous system through fungal filaments that penetrated the skin and bonded with nerve clusters. These connections allowed for reaction times far faster than any manual control system could provide, while simultaneously creating a two-way flow of information between armor and wearer. The armor didn't merely protect the Krork, it actively monitored its biological status and adjusted its own systems accordingly. The power generation system incorporated into the armor revealed equally sophisticated design principles. Rather than relying solely on conventional energy sources, the system appeared designed to harvest and amplify the Krork's own bioelectric field, creating a self-sustaining power loop that required minimal external input. This approach to energy management far exceeds even the most efficient Imperial power systems, which remain dependent on regular refueling or recharging regardless of design. The weapons carried by the specimen demonstrated similar biointegration. The trigger mechanisms connected directly to the nervous system through the armor interfaces, allowing for firing response times measured in milliseconds rather than the seconds required for conscious decision and physical action. More impressively, targeting systems within the weapons linked directly to the visual cortex, effectively allowing the Krork to aim simply by looking at a target rather than requiring manual alignment. The materials science displayed in both armor and weapons exceeded current Imperial capabilities in several key areas. The crystalline structures incorporated throughout showed evidence of atomic-level engineering, with molecular arrangements precisely calibrated for specific properties, energy conductivity in some components, extreme hardness in others, and psychic responsiveness in yet others. This level of material customization remains beyond the capabilities of all but the most advanced Mechanicus Forge worlds. The psychological implications of the Solemnis specimen may be even more significant than the technological revelations. The neural structures preserved within the Krork's brain suggest a mind capable of complex strategic thinking, technological innovation, and sophisticated communication, a far cry from the crude cunning that characterizes even the most intelligent modern Ork warbosses. This intelligence, combined with the inherent aggression and physical prowess of the greenskin species, would make true Krork's adversaries more dangerous than perhaps any threat currently facing the Imperium. The specimen's physical scale alone presents troubling implications for military planners. At 12 meters tall, the preserved Krork would tower over even Imperial knights, with proportionate strength that could potentially tear through tank armor with its bare hands. The sophisticated armor at war would likely resist all but the heaviest anti-tank weapons, while its integrated weapon systems could devastate infantry formations or light vehicles with ease. A force composed of such beings would require Titan-level firepower to engage effectively. The War of the Beast in the 32nd Millennium presented the Imperium with an unprecedented greenskin threat that bore disturbing similarities to the ancient Krorks. The Beast of Ulanor and his 6 prime Orks displayed physical and intellectual characteristics far beyond those of typical Orks, suggesting a partial reversion to their ancestral form under the extreme evolutionary pressure of continuous warfare against the expanding Imperium. Standing at approximately 10 meters tall, the beast towered over even Primaris space marines, approaching the stature of the preserved Krork specimen in Trajan's collection. His physical form displayed the dense musculature and reinforced skeletal structure characteristic of ancient Krorks, though lacking some of the more sophisticated biological adaptations seen in the Solemnis specimen. Picked captures recovered from the Ulanor campaign show a being whose posture and bearing more closely resembled the military precision of the ancient Krork than the hunched, brutish stance of modern Ork warbosses. The armor worn by the beast and his prime Orks represented a significant advancement over standard Ork protection, incorporating interlocking plates with precision joints that allowed for remarkable mobility despite their massive size. While not achieving the seamless biointegration seen in true Krork battle plate, this armor displayed design principles that went beyond the crude, scavenged protection typical of even the largest Ork knobs. Metallurgical analysis of fragments recovered from the final battle on Ulanor revealed alloy compositions significantly more sophisticated than standard Ork metallurgy, with stress distribution properties approaching those of Imperial power armor. Most telling was the neural interface system incorporated into the beast's armor. Unlike the crude mechanical controls used by modern Ork vehicles and war machines, this system allowed for direct mental command of both personal equipment and larger war assets. This interface bears striking resemblance to the psycho-conductive systems described in ancient Krork artifacts, suggesting a partial reactivation of genetic memory related to advanced technology integration. The weapons wielded by the beast and his prime Orks similarly displayed technological sophistication far beyond conventional Ork arsenals. Their energy weapons generated focused beams capable of penetrating void shields and adamantium armor with consistent precision, rather than the erratic performance typical of Ork zap guns. Close combat weapons incorporated disruption fields that operated on principles similar to Imperial power weapons, but with greater stability and energy efficiency, allowing for sustained use without the power drain issues that plague Imperial designs. The most significant parallel between the beast's forces and ancient Krorks appeared in their organizational structure. Where typical Ork warbands operate as loosely connected mobs, united primarily by the dominant warboss's force of personality, the beast established a sophisticated hierarchy with specialized roles and clear chains of command. This structure more closely resembled the caste system of ancient Krork society than the crude pecking order of modern Ork tribes. The 6 prime Orks who served as the beast's lieutenants displayed specialized adaptations for their particular roles. The Beast of Ork kill cruiser fleets possessed enhanced neural structures dedicated to void warfare and fleet coordination. The Beast of Ork gargants showed biological adaptations optimized for interfacing with massive war machines. These specializations echo the purpose-specific variants described in fragmentary records of ancient Krork society, suggesting a partial reemergence of the sophisticated caste system that characterized their ancestors. Perhaps most unsettling for Imperial commanders was the beast's intellectual capacity. Unlike typical Ork warbosses, who display crude cunning at best, the beast demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking, including complex feints, multi-system coordinated attacks, and psychological warfare. His ability to speak fluent Gothic and engage in diplomatic negotiations with Imperial representatives suggests cognitive capabilities far closer to ancient Krorks than modern Orks. Inquisitorial analysis of his communications indicates a vocabulary of approximately 35,000 words, comparable to educated Imperial citizens and far exceeding the few hundred crude terms used by typical Ork warbosses. The technological resurgence during the beast's Wa provides the strongest evidence for genetic memory of Krork knowledge. The attack moons represent the most visible manifestation of this recovered technology, massive artificial planetoids that served as mobile fortresses, manufacturing centers, and weapons platforms. These structures combined aspects of conventional engineering with biological growth in ways that echo descriptions of ancient Krork biomechanical integration. Mago's explorator Delvarus, who briefly examined an attack moon's outer structure before its destruction, noted that the surface material appeared to grow and heal damage in a manner similar to living tissue while maintaining the structural properties of hardened ceramite. This combination of biological adaptation with engineering principles precisely matches fragmentary descriptions of Krork construction techniques from the War in Heaven period. The propulsion systems of these attack moons displayed equally sophisticated technology. Rather than conventional plasma drives or warp engines, they utilized gravitic manipulation on a scale beyond current Imperial capabilities, allowing for precise positioning and rapid transit between systems without entering the warp. This technology bears striking similarities to recovered fragments of what xenotechnologists believe were Krork void ship drive systems, suggesting direct technological lineage rather than parallel development. The most impressive aspect of the attack moons was their teleportation capability. Unlike Imperial teleporters, which remained short-ranged and notoriously unreliable, these systems could transport thousands of Orks and massive war machines across interplanetary distances with precision that stunned Mechanicus observers. This technology appears to represent a degraded version of the matter transmission systems described in ancient accounts of Krork military operations during the War in Heaven. The power generation systems supporting these massive structures demonstrated efficiency far beyond conventional Ork technology. Instead of the crude reactors typically used in Ork vessels, the attack moons incorporated crystalline energy matrices that harvested and amplified the ambient Wa energy generated by their massive Ork populations. This approach to power generation closely resembles descriptions of ancient Krork energy systems, which similarly leveraged psychic energy as a primary power source. Manufacturing capabilities aboard the attack moons far exceeded those of conventional Ork society. Where modern Ork production relies primarily on the intuitive skills of individual mechboys working with scavenged materials, the attack moons contained vast automated production facilities capable of producing standardized, precision-engineered weapons and vehicles. This systematic approach to manufacturing echoes the industrial organization described in fragmentary records of Krork forge complexes. The Orks themselves showed biological changes during the Beast's War that suggested genetic reversion toward Krork physiology. Beyond the obvious increase in size, autopsy reports from Beast-era Orks show increased brain mass, particularly in regions associated with higher cognitive functions and language processing. Muscle tissue displayed density approximately 25% greater than typical Orks, with enhanced myofibril structures more closely resembling those described in ancient Krork specimens. Most significant was the development of specialized variants beyond the standard oddboys seen in conventional Ork society. The Beast's forces included engineer equivalents whose technical understanding went far beyond the instinctive knowledge of mechboys, diplomat specialists capable of complex communication with non-Orks, and coordinator types whose enhanced connection to the WA field allowed them to direct complex operations across multiple systems simultaneously. These specialized variants bear striking resemblance to the purpose-specific castes described in ancient Krork social structures. The psychic capabilities displayed during the Beasts War similarly suggested partial reversion to Krork-level abilities. While conventional Ork weirdboys channel WA energy primarily as crude destructive force, Beast-era psychers demonstrated more sophisticated applications, including long-range communication, limited precognition, and targeted disruption of enemy psychic phenomena. These applications more closely match descriptions of ancient Krork seer equivalents than the uncontrolled power manifestations of modern Ork weirdboys. Imperial reports from this period consistently note the disturbing level of coordination displayed by the Beast's forces. Unlike typical Ork warbands, which operate as semi-independent mobs loosely directed by their warboss, these armies executed complex maneuvers with precision that suggested a sophisticated command structure. Multiple formations would coordinate their actions across vast distances, implementing pincer movements, feints, and strategic withdrawals that baffled Imperial commanders accustomed to the straightforward aggression of conventional Ork tactics. This coordination extended to void operations as well. The Beast's fleet movements displayed strategic sophistication rarely seen even in Imperial naval operations, with precise positioning, coordinated strike groups, and effective screening formations. The ability to maintain such complex void tactics across multiple systems simultaneously suggests command and control capabilities far beyond those of conventional Ork warbosses, approaching the strategic acumen attributed to ancient Krork commanders. The language used by Beast-era Orks provides further evidence of genetic reversion toward Krork sophistication. Vox captures from this period reveal a dialect significantly more complex than the crude Orkish spoken by conventional greenskins. This language incorporated complex grammatical structures, abstract concepts, and technical terminology entirely absent from modern Ork communication. Linguists from the Ordo Xenos who analyzed these recordings noted similarities to fragmentary Krork communications recovered from ancient data crystals, suggesting partial recovery of their ancestral language. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of the Beast's forces was their ability to learn and adapt. Where conventional Ork tactics remain relatively static, relying on overwhelming numbers and brute force rather than tactical innovation, Beast-era commanders demonstrated the ability to analyze Imperial responses and develop effective counters. This adaptive capability suggests cognitive flexibility far closer to ancient Krorks than modern Orks, whose tactical approaches remain largely instinctual rather than analytical. The infrastructure established by the Beast's forces on occupied worlds further demonstrates the resurgence of Krork organizational capabilities. Rather than the haphazard settlements typical of Ork occupation, these worlds featured carefully planned military-industrial complexes optimized for resource extraction, manufacturing, and troop deployment. The layout of these facilities followed consistent patterns that maximized efficiency and defensibility, suggesting systematic planning rather than the opportunistic construction seen in conventional Ork territories. Manufacturing facilities within these complexes displayed standardization and quality control entirely absent from typical Ork production. Weapons and vehicles produced during this period show consistent dimensions, interchangeable components, and precision engineering that more closely resembles Imperial manufacturing than conventional Ork custom work. This standardization echoes descriptions of ancient Krork industrial organization, where specialized builder Krorks maintained strict production standards across vast manufacturing networks. The emergence of Gazkul Mag Uruk-Thraka as the preeminent Ork warlord of the 41st millennium has drawn significant attention from Ordo Xeno's researchers due to several anomalous characteristics that suggest a potential genetic reversion toward Krork physiological patterns. The most immediately apparent of these characteristics is his unusual cranial development, which differs substantially from typical Ork warbosses both in structure and function. Standard Ork cranial anatomy features a thick, sloped forehead with minimal frontal lobe development. Gazkul's skull, by contrast, shows significant expansion in regions associated with higher cognitive functions, strategic planning, and complex language processing. Pick captures from the Third War for Armageddon reveal a pronounced cranial ridge and expanded temporal regions that bear striking similarity to skull fragments recovered from ancient Krork battle sites near the Ghoul Stars. This cranial expansion isn't merely cosmetic. Psychic interrogation of captured Orks from Gazkul's Wa reveals a sophisticated command structure implemented through both conventional hierarchy and psychic projection. Unlike typical warbosses who maintain control primarily through physical intimidation, Gazkul appears capable of projecting his tactical directives directly into the minds of his subordinates across significant distances, allowing for coordination of forces across multiple fronts simultaneously. Inquisitor Horst Beltran, who spent 3 decades studying Gazkul's campaigns before his disappearance during the fall of Medusa V, documented instances where separated elements of Gazkul's forces executed complex pincer movements despite having no conventional communication. This level of coordination bears uncomfortable resemblance to accounts of ancient Krork military operations, where specialized psychic amplifiers allowed commanders to direct massive armies across vast distances. The source of Gazkul's enhanced cranial development can be traced to a specific traumatic event early in his rise to power. According to accounts from Orks captured during the early stages of the Second War for Armageddon, Gazkul survived a bolter round to the head that would have killed most Orks outright. The wound was treated by a painboy known as Mad Doc Grotznik, who replaced the damaged portion of Gazkul's skull with metal plates and crude augmetics. What makes this case unusual is the biological response to this trauma and augmentation. Where most Orks would simply heal around the foreign material, Gazkul's brain appears to have actively incorporated the augmetics into its structure, using them as a framework for accelerated neural growth. Magos biologist Hextus Varn, analyzing third-hand reports from Mechanicus observers on Armageddon, suggested that this integration of technology with biology bears disturbing similarity to the biomechanical integration seen in ancient Krork specimens. The psychic potential demonstrated by Gazkul far exceeds that of typical Ork warbosses. While all Orks contribute to and draw upon the Wa energy field, most do so unconsciously, with only specialized weirdboys capable of deliberately channeling this power. Gazkul, by contrast, appears capable of consciously directing and focusing the Wa energy generated by his followers, using it to enhance his physical capabilities, project his will across vast distances, and occasionally glimpse potential futures. This last ability, a form of crude precognition, represents perhaps the most significant parallel with ancient Krork capabilities. Gazkul has repeatedly demonstrated foreknowledge of Imperial movements and deployments that could not have been obtained through conventional intelligence gathering. During the Third War for Armageddon, he withdrew forces from 3 major engagement zones hours before devastating Imperial artillery barrages, despite no visible evidence of the impending attacks. The technological developments within Ghazghkull's Goth clan show equally disturbing parallels to ancient Krork engineering principles. Where typical Ork technology relies primarily on crude imitation and intuitive tinkering, the war machines deployed by Ghazghkull's forces display increasing standardization and systematic improvement across generations. The mech-Boyz under his command appear to be implementing iterative design processes rather than the random modifications typical of Ork engineering. Examination of captured vehicles from Ghazghkull's Wa reveals standardized connection points, interchangeable components, and consistent power distribution systems, features entirely absent from typical Ork technology. These standardized designs allow for field repairs using pre-manufactured components rather than the improvised solutions favored by most mech-Boyz. This approach to manufacturing bears uncomfortable resemblance to the industrial standardization described in fragmentary records of Krork production facilities. The weapons technology deployed by Ghazghkull's forces shows similar advancement. Where typical Ork firearms suffer from inconsistent performance and frequent malfunction, weapons recovered from Ghazghkull's elite units demonstrate remarkable reliability and consistent performance characteristics. Metallurgical analysis of these weapons reveals alloy compositions significantly more sophisticated than standard Ork technology, with precision machine components that reduce jamming and improve accuracy. Energy weapons deployed by Ghazghkull's forces demonstrate particularly concerning advancement. Typical Ork, zap guns, produce erratic energy discharges with unpredictable effects and frequent power fluctuations. The plasma analog weapons used by Ghazghkull's elite knobs incorporate stabilization systems that prevent the overheating issues common in both Ork and Imperial plasma technology. These systems bear striking similarity to cooling mechanisms described in ancient accounts of Krork energy weapons. The armor worn by Ghazghkull himself represents the most visible manifestation of technological advancement within his forces. Unlike the crude plates typical of Ork warbosses, Ghazghkull's armor incorporates interlocking components with precision joints that allow for remarkable mobility despite its massive bulk. The power systems integrated throughout this armor enhance his already formidable strength while providing protection equivalent to Imperial Terminator plate. Most concerning is the neural interface system incorporated into Ghazghkull's armor. Unlike the crude mechanical controls used by typical Ork war leaders, this system appears to connect directly to his nervous system through the metal plates embedded in his skull. This interface allows for reaction times far faster than conventional control systems could provide, giving him combat capabilities that exceed even those of experienced Space Marine commanders. The technology bears uncomfortable resemblance to the biomechanical integration described in accounts of ancient Krork battle plate. The organizational structure implemented by Ghazghkull across his expanding empire shows equally disturbing parallels to ancient Krork social hierarchies. Where typical Ork warbands operate as loosely connected mobs united primarily by the dominant warboss's force of personality, Ghazghkull has established a sophisticated command structure with specialized roles and clear chains of authority that extend far beyond his immediate presence. This structure includes dedicated communication specialists who maintain contact between separated elements of his forces, logistics coordinators who ensure steady supply of ammunition and equipment to frontline units, and specialized assault formations trained for specific battlefield roles rather than the generalized mob tactics favored by most Ork warbands. This level of specialization and coordination bears uncomfortable resemblance to the caste-based organization described in fragmentary records of Krork military operations. The religious dimension of Ghazghkull's leadership represents another parallel with ancient Krork society, where typical Ork warbosses maintain control primarily through physical dominance. Ghazghkull has cultivated a quasi-religious authority based on his claimed communication with the Ork gods Gork and Mork. This religious aspect provides a unifying ideology that extends his influence far beyond what physical intimidation alone could achieve. This religious authority allows Ghazghkull to implement strategic decisions that would face resistance from typical Ork commanders, including tactical withdrawals, resource conservation, and long-term planning, concepts largely alien to conventional Ork thought. The combination of religious authority with military command bears striking similarity to the dual role played by prime Krorks in ancient Greenskin society, where military leadership was reinforced by psychic dominance and ideological control. The genetic implications of Ghazghkull's unusual development have not escaped the attention of the Ordo Xenos. Inquisitor Katarina Greyfax, during her brief involvement with Armageddon monitoring operations, commissioned a comprehensive genetic analysis of tissue samples recovered from battlefields where Ghazghkull's forces had been engaged. The results proved deeply concerning to Imperial authorities. The genetic material showed evidence of activated sequences previously dormant in standard Ork DNA, sequences that correspond to regions identified in ancient Krork specimens associated with enhanced cognitive function, psychic potential, and sophisticated biological systems. These activations appear concentrated in Orks from Ghazghkull's inner circle, suggesting that proximity to his powerful Wa field may trigger genetic expression normally suppressed in modern Ork populations. Most alarming was the discovery of what Magos Biologus Hextus Varn termed recursive enhancement patterns within these activated sequences. Unlike standard genetic expression, which remains relatively stable once activated, these patterns showed evidence of continuing development, each generation of expression creating more sophisticated structures that further enhanced the next cycle of development. This self-reinforcing genetic pattern bears uncomfortable resemblance to the accelerated evolution mechanisms theorized to exist in original Krork genetic templates. The potential for widespread genetic reversion among Ork populations exposed to Ghazghkull's influence represents a strategic threat that has prompted the implementation of specialized Ordo Xenos monitoring protocols. These protocols, classified at the highest levels of Imperial security, include dedicated Auspex arrays designed to detect the specific psychic signatures associated with enhanced Ork neural activity, infiltration of Ghazghkull's forces by specially modified assassins resistant to Ork spore contamination, and standing orders for immediate exterminatus of any world where significant populations of genetically enhanced Orks are confirmed. The monitoring extends beyond Ghazghkull himself to include any Ork warlord showing signs of unusual development. The emergence of figures like Overfiend of Octarius and Gruk Face Ripa, both displaying tactical sophistication and organizational abilities beyond typical Ork leaders, has triggered enhanced surveillance of their operations. The possibility that Ghazghkull represents not an isolated anomaly, but the leading edge of a species-wide evolutionary shift has profound implications for Imperial strategic planning. This concern has led to the establishment of specialized research facilities dedicated to understanding the mechanisms of Ork genetic expression and developing countermeasures against potential reversion to Krork-like capabilities. These facilities, operating under the direct authority of the Inquisition, combine biological research with archaeological investigation, seeking both the means to suppress enhanced genetic expression in current Ork populations and historical insights into how the ancient Krorks were eventually defeated. The archaeological aspect of this research has focused on sites associated with the final decline of Krork civilization, seeking evidence of weapons or strategies that might have accelerated their degradation into modern Orks. Particular attention has been paid to regions where Eldari expansion encountered Krork populations, based on fragmentary evidence suggesting that early Eldari civilizations may have developed specialized weapons specifically designed to target and corrupt Krork genetic stability. The technological development observed in Ghazghkull's forces extends beyond weapons and armor to include sophisticated communication systems that allow for coordination across vast distances. Unlike the crude Vox systems used by typical Ork warbands, which rarely extend beyond shouting range, the communication network implemented by Gazkul's forces incorporates elements of psychic amplification that enable clear transmission across interplanetary distances. This communication network bears uncomfortable resemblance to the psychic coordination systems described in ancient accounts of Krork military operations. The technology combines conventional electromagnetic transmission with psychic amplification, allowing Gazkul to maintain direct control over forces spread across multiple star systems simultaneously. This level of command and control represents a quantum leap beyond the capabilities of typical Ork warbands, whose effectiveness typically diminishes rapidly with distance from their warboss. The Octarius War stands as perhaps the most significant evolutionary pressure exerted on the Ork species since the War of the Beast. When Hive Fleet Leviathan's tendrils first penetrated the Octarius sector in the late 41st millennium, Inquisitor Kryptman's desperate gambit to redirect the Tyranid threat unwittingly created the perfect crucible for Orkish advancement. The resulting conflict between these two supremely adaptable species has accelerated Ork evolution in ways that deeply concern Imperial xenobiologists and strategists alike. Deathwatch kill teams operating on the fringes of the conflict zone have documented disturbing physiological changes in Ork specimens encountered during containment operations. Captain Artemis of the Mortifactors, leading reconnaissance missions into Octarian space in the year 992 of the 41st millennium, recovered tissue samples from Ork warriors that showed marked differences from baseline greenskin biology. Analysis performed by Magos Biologis Hextus Varn revealed increased neural density in frontal and temporal lobes, enhanced musculature with approximately 22% greater fiber density than standard Orks, and more efficient respiratory systems capable of operating in environments with oxygen content as low as 9%. These physical adaptations alone would represent cause for concern, but the behavioral changes observed in veteran Orks from the Octarius conflict zones prove far more alarming. Standard Ork tactics typically rely on overwhelming numbers and straightforward aggression, with minimal adaptation beyond crude responses to immediate battlefield conditions. Octarius veterans, by contrast, demonstrate sophisticated tactical awareness, including effective use of cover, coordinated fire patterns, and deliberate targeting of Tyranid synapse creatures. Magos xenobiologist Farron Dastark, assigned to analyze combat footage collected by Deathwatch observation posts on the edges of the conflict zone, noted that Ork units that had survived multiple engagements with Tyranid forces displayed increasing coordination with each subsequent battle. Early encounters showed typical Ork mob tactics, disorganized charges with minimal fire discipline. By the fourth or fifth engagement, these same units had developed standardized formations with specialized roles, including dedicated suppression teams that pinned Tyranid organisms in place while assault groups targeted their flanks. This tactical evolution occurred at rates far exceeding normal Ork learning curves. Standard greenskin forces typically require dozens of engagements to develop even rudimentary adaptations to enemy tactics. The Octarius Orks demonstrated complex counter strategies after as few as 3 encounters with specific Tyranid bioforms. This accelerated learning suggests activation of dormant neural pathways more sophisticated than those typically expressed in modern Orks. The weapons technology employed by Octarius Orks shows equally concerning advancement. Deathwatch Techmarine brother Demetrian recovered several examples of Ork firearms from abandoned positions following a particularly intense Tyranid assault. These weapons displayed precision engineering entirely absent from standard Ork technology, including rifled barrels with consistent bore dimensions, standardized ammunition with uniform propellant loads, and targeting systems that actually improved accuracy rather than merely making impressive noises. Most alarming was the recovery of what appeared to be prototype bioweapons designed specifically to target Tyranid organisms. These crude but effective devices dispersed airborne toxins that attacked the specialized respiratory systems of Tyranid creatures while leaving orc physiology unaffected. The development of such targeted biological agents suggests scientific understanding far beyond the capabilities of conventional mechas, approaching the sophisticated biowarfare techniques attributed to ancient Krork healer equivalents. The armor utilized by veteran Octarius orcs shows similar advancement. Rather than the hodgepodge of scavenged materials typical of orc protection, these specimens wore standardized plates manufactured to consistent specifications. Metallurgical analysis revealed sophisticated alloy compositions incorporating minerals harvested from Tyrannid carapaces, creating armor with exceptional resistance to both the biological acids and physical strikes favored by Tyrannid organisms. The integration of this armor with orc physiology represents perhaps the most concerning development. Where standard orc armor simply straps onto the wearer's body, these advanced systems incorporated interface points that connected directly to the wearer's musculature. While crude compared to the seamless biointegration seen in ancient Krork specimens, these connections allowed for enhanced strength and reaction times by directly stimulating orc muscle groups in response to incoming attacks. The command structure observed among Octarius orcs shows equally significant evolution. Standard orc warbands operate on a straightforward might-makes-right hierarchy, with leadership determined primarily by physical size and combat prowess. The orc forces engaged in prolonged conflict with Tyrannids have developed more sophisticated command systems, including specialized lieutenant roles based on tactical expertise rather than merely physical dominance. Vox intercepts collected by Deathwatch observation posts reveal communication patterns of unprecedented complexity among these forces. Where typical orc commanders issue simple, direct orders, Octarius warbosses have been recorded giving detailed tactical directives including specific target prioritization, coordinated movement patterns, and even contingency plans for various enemy responses. The linguistic complexity of these communications suggests cognitive development far beyond baseline orc capabilities. The most direct evidence for Krork-like characteristics emerging in the Octarius conflict comes from picked captures of the largest orc warlords operating in the region. These individuals stand notably taller than typical warbosses, with the largest specimens reaching heights of nearly 5 meters, approaching the lower size range described in ancient accounts of Krork warriors. Their physical bearing shows the straight-backed, purposeful posture associated with Krork specimens rather than the hunched, aggressive stance typical of modern orcs. The armor worn by these warlords incorporates technological elements unseen in conventional orc equipment. Power fields that actually function consistently, targeting systems with predictable accuracy, and communication devices capable of coordinating forces across continental distances. While still crude compared to Imperial technology, these systems represent a significant advancement over standard orc equipment and bear uncomfortable similarities to descriptions of ancient Krork war gear. Inquisitor Callistrati of the Ordo Xenos, who maintained a network of observers throughout the initial stages of the Octarius conflict, compiled a classified assessment of the evolutionary patterns observed among the greenskin forces. His report, restricted to inquisitorial access level Vermilion, concluded that the continuous pressure of fighting the highly adaptive Tyrannids had triggered activation of dormant genetic sequences in the orc genome, sequences that corresponded to traits associated with ancient Krorks. The mechanism behind this accelerated evolution appears linked to the fundamental nature of orc reproduction. Unlike conventional biological species that evolve through natural selection across multiple generations, orcs reproduce through spores that incorporate genetic information from successful individuals. This allows for a form of Lamarckian inheritance where adaptations acquired during an orc's lifetime can be passed directly to subsequent generations. In the intense battlefield laboratory of Octarius, this reproductive system has gone into overdrive. Orcs that develop successful adaptations against Tyrannid organisms survive to release more spores, while their less adapted brethren perish. With each cycle of conflict, the new generation of orcs emerges with the accumulated adaptations of their predecessors already encoded in their biology, creating an evolutionary acceleration that outpaces even the Tyranids' legendary adaptability. The environmental pressure created by continuous conflict against a highly lethal and equally adaptable enemy appears to be triggering expression of genetic potential that has remained dormant since the degradation of the Krork species millions of years ago. Mago's biologist Farron Dastark, analyzing tissue samples from multiple generations of Octarius orcs, identified sections of the orc genome that showed increased activity with each successive generation, sections that correspond to regions identified in ancient Krork specimens associated with enhanced cognitive function, biological sophistication, and technological aptitude. The implications of this genetic reawakening extend far beyond the immediate threat of the Octarius conflict. If the pressure of fighting Tyranids can trigger partial reversion to Krork-like characteristics, then similar evolution could potentially occur wherever orcs face sustained, existential challenges. The current galaxy, torn by the Great Rift and besieged by countless threats, provides no shortage of such evolutionary catalysts. Imperial strategists monitoring the situation have identified several particularly concerning scenarios. The ongoing conflict between Gazkul's Wa and Imperial forces on Armageddon has already produced orcs of unusual size and sophistication. If veterans from this conflict were to encounter and integrate with evolved specimens from Octarius, the resulting exchange of genetic material could accelerate the emergence of Krork-like traits throughout the broader orc population. The technology transfer potential presents equally alarming possibilities. The advanced weaponry and armor developed by Octarius orcs to combat Tyranid organisms would prove devastatingly effective against Imperial forces if widely adopted. The standardized manufacturing techniques emerging among these populations could allow for rapid production and distribution of these advanced systems, potentially elevating the entire technological base of Orc society beyond its current crude efficiency. Lord Admiral Spire, commanding Imperial Navy assets assigned to quarantine the Octarius sector, submitted a strategic assessment to the High Lords of Terra that painted a grim picture of potential outcomes. In his analysis, the conflict between orcs and Tyranids represented not a convenient mutual destruction of two Xenos threats, as originally hoped, but rather an evolutionary accelerator that could potentially produce an enemy more dangerous than either original combatant. The most disturbing evidence comes from the few survivors of Deathwatch Kill Team Alphys, who penetrated deep into Octarius territory to assess the state of the conflict. Their auger readings detected energy signatures consistent with advanced power generation systems emanating from primary orc settlements, systems far more sophisticated than the crude reactors typically employed by orc mechboys. The energy output levels recorded before the team's extraction suggest power generation approaching that of small Imperial hive cities, sufficient to support manufacturing and research on a scale previously unseen in orc society. The biological samples recovered by this team before their extraction showed even more concerning developments. Genetic analysis revealed the presence of specialized neural structures in recently spawned orcs that closely resemble those found in ancient Krork specimens, structures associated with enhanced cognitive function, complex language processing, and technological comprehension. These structures appeared most developed in orcs spawned in areas of most intense conflict, suggesting direct correlation between battlefield pressure and genetic reversion. The psychic dimension of this evolution may represent the most significant long-term threat. Orc weirdboys captured from Octarius-adjacent war zones display psychic capabilities beyond those typically associated with their kind. Where standard orc psychers channel Wa energy primarily as crude destructive force, these specimens demonstrate more controlled applications, including limited precognition, targeted disruption of enemy psychers, and enhanced communication across vast distances. These enhanced psychic capabilities bear uncomfortable resemblance to the sophisticated Wa manipulation attributed to ancient Krork seer equivalents. If this development continues along its current trajectory, it could potentially lead to the emergence of a coordinated psychic network among evolved orc populations, a strategic advantage that would make containing their expansion exponentially more difficult. The strategic implications have prompted implementation of containment protocols far exceeding those typically employed against Ork threats. The Death Watch has established a permanent cordon of monitoring stations around the Octarius sector, with standing orders to eliminate any Ork vessels attempting to leave the conflict zone. These operations receive priority resource allocation, even in the face of multiple competing crises, reflecting the Ordo Xeno's assessment of evolved Orks as a potentially civilization-ending threat. Inquisitor Kryptman, whose original gambit redirecting Hive Fleet Leviathan into Ork space inadvertently created this evolutionary pressure cooker, has emerged from excommunicate status to lead specialized research into potential countermeasures. His current work focuses on identifying genetic vulnerabilities in the awakening Krork genome that might be exploited to interrupt the evolutionary progression before it reaches critical advancement. The most promising avenue identified thus far involves targeting the specialized fungal organisms that facilitate genetic information transfer between Ork generations. These symbiotic fungi, which process and incorporate adaptations from successful Orks into the spores that will produce the next generation, represent a potential bottleneck in the evolutionary acceleration. Weaponized mycological agents designed to corrupt this transfer process could potentially halt or reverse the emergence of Krork-like traits without requiring direct military engagement with the increasingly dangerous Ork forces. The potential re-emergence of Krork-like characteristics in the Ork species represents one of the most significant strategic threats facing the Imperium in the 42nd millennium. While the galaxy fractures under the strain of countless existential dangers, from the expanding Tyranid Hive fleets to the resurgent Necron dynasties, the evolutionary trajectory of the Ork species may ultimately prove the most consequential. Strategic assessment documents compiled by Lord General Castor of the Cadian Eighth indicate that even a partial reversion to Krork capabilities could shift the balance of power decisively against Imperial interests. The Adeptus Munitorum has conducted extensive threat modeling based on archaeological evidence of Krork capabilities, combined with observed evolutionary patterns in modern Ork populations. These models suggest that if even 15% of current Ork forces were to develop characteristics comparable to those displayed during the War of the Beast, the Imperium would be forced to commit approximately 70% of its military resources to containment operations, leaving minimal forces available to counter other Xenos threats or suppress internal rebellions. More concerning are projections involving full Krork reversion. The classified Solemnis Contingency document, drafted by Ordo Xeno's Inquisitor Calistrati after reviewing the preserved specimen in Trajan's collection, estimates that a galaxy-wide emergence of true Krorks would exceed the Imperium's containment capabilities by a factor of at least 6. Even with the return of Robute Guilliman and the introduction of Primaris Space Marines, Imperial military assets simply lack the necessary force projection to counter a species combining Ork numbers with Krork sophistication. The technological implications prove equally alarming. Current Ork technology, while crude and unreliable by Imperial standards, already poses significant challenges due to its sheer destructive potential and endless adaptability. Krork technology, based on recovered artifacts and historical accounts, operated at a level that would rival or exceed current Adeptus Mechanicus capabilities in many areas. The prospect of Ork forces equipped with weapons and armor approaching this level of sophistication represents a fundamental shift in the strategic calculus of galactic warfare. Magos Dominus Hieronymus Tesla of the Adeptus Mechanicus Research Facility on Graea has conducted comparative analysis of weapons technology recovered from various Ork populations, showing signs of accelerated evolution. His findings indicate a clear progression toward more sophisticated energy management systems, more precise manufacturing tolerances, and more efficient power generation. While still far from true Krork technology, the trajectory suggests that within as little as 5 standard centuries, advanced Ork populations could develop weapons technology approaching that of mid-tier Imperial Forge worlds. The most immediate concern involves defensive measures against increasingly sophisticated Ork weaponry. Current Imperial armor designs, particularly those issued to standard Astra Militarum forces, were developed primarily to counter weapons within expected performance parameters for typical Ork technology. The enhanced penetration capabilities already observed in weapons recovered from Octarius adjacent warzones exceed these parameters by approximately 35%, rendering standard flak armor effectively useless, and even compromising the protection offered by carapace armor. The Adeptus Munitorum has initiated Project Adamant Shield to address this emerging threat, focusing on developing more resilient armor systems that can be mass-produced with available resources. Early prototypes incorporate layered ceramite with impact reactive gel substrates, providing enhanced protection against both the increased penetration of evolved Ork projectile weapons and the higher energy output of their improving energy weapons. However, production limitations mean that even if these designs prove effective, equipping frontline forces will take decades under current manufacturing constraints. Offensive countermeasures present equally significant challenges. Historical records from the War of the Beast indicate that conventional Imperial weapons struggled to penetrate the armor worn by the Beast and its prime Orks. If modern Orks were to develop protection approaching this level of sophistication, standard issue lasguns and autoguns would become effectively obsolete as anti-Ork weapons. Even Space Marine bolters, the mainstay of the Adeptus Astartes arsenal, might prove insufficient against truly advanced Ork armor. Lord Commander Guilliman, recognizing this potential threat, has directed the Adeptus Mechanicus to prioritize research into weapons specifically designed to counter evolved Ork physiology. This initiative, designated Operation Krork Hammer, focuses on identifying vulnerabilities unique to the Ork/Krork biological structure that might be exploited even as their technology improves. Preliminary research suggests that despite their increasing sophistication, evolved Orks retain certain fundamental biological constants that might provide targeting opportunities for specialized weapons. The most promising avenue involves disrupting the symbiotic relationship between Ork bodies and their integrated fungal components. Magos biologist Hextus Varn has developed experimental mycophagic compounds that selectively target the specialized fungi that facilitate Ork healing and growth without affecting other biological systems. Weapons deploying these compounds could potentially bypass physical armor entirely, attacking the Ork's internal biological systems directly. Field tests against captured specimens show mortality rates exceeding 80% with exposure to concentrated doses, though delivery mechanisms for battlefield application remain under development. Energy weapons tuned to specific frequencies have shown similar promise. Analysis of tissue samples from both modern Orks and the limited available Krork specimens indicates unique resonance patterns in their cellular structures. Las weapons modified to emit at these specific frequencies achieve approximately 40% greater tissue disruption than standard patterns, potentially allowing even basic Imperial energy weapons to remain effective against evolved Ork targets if properly calibrated. Beyond conventional weaponry, the Ordo Xenos has explored more esoteric approaches to countering potential Krork resurgence. The Eldari, with their long racial memory stretching back to the war in Heaven, maintain knowledge of weapons, specifically designed to combat Krorks during that ancient conflict. While the xenophobic Elder species rarely shares such information willingly, certain radical inquisitors have established tenuous alliances with Harlequin troops and Corsair bands willing to provide limited insights in exchange for mutual security arrangements. The information gleaned from these exchanges suggests that ancient Eldari developed weapons that targeted the psychic dimension of Krork biology rather than merely their physical forms. These weapons disrupted the connection between individual Krorks and the Gestalt-Wa field, effectively severing them from the collective knowledge and energy that made their technology function. Modern adaptations of these principles might potentially allow for the development of psychic disruptor weapons that could render even technologically advanced orcs vulnerable by disabling the Wa energy that enhances their capabilities. The Necrons represent another potential source of anti-Krork weaponry, having fought against the original Krorks during the War in Heaven. Trazyn the Infinite, with his extensive collection of historical artifacts, likely possesses examples of weapons specifically designed to counter Krork biology and technology. The challenge lies in convincing the Mercurial Collector to share such knowledge, a diplomatic task complicated by the Necrons' general disdain for lesser species and Trazyn's unpredictable nature. Nevertheless, certain Ordo Xenos Inquisitors maintain cautious communication channels with the Lord of Solemnness, recognizing that his vast knowledge may prove invaluable should full Krork reversion occur. Strategic containment presents challenges beyond merely weapons development. The Imperium has historically relied on a combination of regular extermination campaigns and buffer zones of regularly sterilized worlds to contain Ork expansion. This approach, while resource-intensive, has proven reasonably effective against conventional Ork threats. Against Orks displaying Krork-like technological sophistication and strategic acumen, these traditional containment methods would likely prove insufficient. The Death Watch, specialists in anti-Xenos warfare, have begun developing new tactical doctrines specifically designed to counter evolved Ork forces. These doctrines emphasize targeting command structures and communication networks rather than merely achieving maximum casualties, recognizing that evolved Orks with enhanced coordination capabilities present fundamentally different strategic challenges than conventional greenskin hordes. Specialized kill teams equipped with experimental weapons and extensive tactical briefings have been deployed to regions showing signs of accelerated Ork evolution, both to test these new approaches and to eliminate particularly advanced specimens before they can spread their genetic adaptations to the broader Ork population. Beyond direct military response, the Imperium has implemented extensive monitoring systems to track potential evolutionary acceleration among Ork populations. The prognosticars of the Ordo Xenos maintain a network of observation posts throughout Ork-controlled and contested space, collecting biological samples and battlefield performance data to identify emerging patterns of advancement. These monitoring operations receive priority resource allocation even in the face of competing crises, reflecting the assessment of evolved Orks as a potentially civilization-ending threat. The most comprehensive monitoring focuses on the Octarius sector, where conflict with Tyranids has created the most intense evolutionary pressure currently affecting Ork populations. The quarantine cordon established around this region involves not only conventional military assets, but also specialized detection systems designed to identify the unique energy signatures associated with advanced Ork technology and the distinctive biological markers of evolved Ork physiology. Any vessel attempting to leave the quarantine zone undergoes extensive scanning, with standing orders to destroy any ship showing signs of Ork contamination, regardless of other considerations. The strategic balance of the galaxy would shift dramatically if Orks were to approach their ancestral Krork capabilities on a significant scale. Current power dynamics rely heavily on the fact that while numerous and individually formidable, Orks lack the coordination and technological sophistication to fully leverage their potential. A species combining Ork numbers and reproductive capacity with Krork intelligence, organization, and technology would represent a threat potentially exceeding even that posed by the Tyranid hive mind or awakening Necron dynasties. The impact would be felt first along the existing frontiers of Ork expansion. Worlds that currently maintain effective defense against conventional Ork raids would find themselves overwhelmed by coordinated assaults employing sophisticated tactics and advanced weaponry. The resulting territorial losses would create a cascade effect, with each conquered world providing additional resources and manufacturing capacity to support further expansion. Imperial strategic projections suggest that without immediate and overwhelming response, such expansion could become self-sustaining within as few as 5 standard years of initial breakthrough. The economic implications for the Imperium would prove equally severe. Current defense budgets allocate approximately 22% of resources to anti-Ork operations across all segmentums. Strategic assessments indicate that this allocation would need to increase to at least 65% to counter Orks approaching Krork capabilities, requiring either substantial reduction in defenses against other threats or significant increases in resource extraction from already overtaxed worlds. Neither option appears sustainable in the long term, creating the potential for systemic collapse even without direct military defeat. The most optimistic assessments suggest that true Krork reversion remains unlikely in the short term, with most evolutionary advancement limited to isolated populations under extreme pressure. The genetic degradation that transformed the original Krorks into modern Orks occurred over millions of years, and while accelerated evolution might partially reverse this process, the complete restoration of Krork capabilities would likely require similarly extended timeframes under normal circumstances. However, the galaxy of the 42nd millennium hardly represents normal circumstances. The psychic awakening, the Great Rift, and the increasing intensity of conflicts across all sectors create unprecedented evolutionary pressures. More concerning, the Ork species possesses unique reproductive characteristics that allow for the rapid dissemination of beneficial adaptations throughout their population. A single successful mutation can spread across an entire Ork-held system within a few generations through spore distribution, potentially accelerating evolutionary processes that would take millennia in conventional species. The Imperium of Man has survived countless existential threats throughout its long and bloody history. From the Horus Heresy to the War of the Beast, from Tyranid hive fleets to Necron awakenings, humanity has endured through sacrifice, faith, and sheer stubborn determination. The potential reemergence of the Krorks represents yet another challenge in this unending struggle for survival. Whether the Imperium possesses the resources, technology, and strategic flexibility to counter this emerging threat remains to be seen, but the consequences of failure would reshape the galaxy in ways not seen since the war in heaven itself. In the grim darkness of the far future, the ancient enemies of the old ones stir once more. The green tide that once stood against the star gods may rise again, not as the crude barbarians that have plagued the galaxy for millennia, but as the engineered warriors they were created to be. For the Imperium, already beset by enemies without and within, this evolutionary resurgence may prove the final test of humanity's claim to galactic dominance. The weapons are being forged, the strategies developed, and the warriors trained, but only time will tell if these preparations will prove sufficient against the return of the Krorks.